with some introductions. Sorry that the lights are off, but it's really the only way projector's going to show up, especially because my 12-year-old projector has decided that today is a great day to start the dyeing process. Cheers to technology.
You got 12 years out of it.
I did. I got 12 years out of it. It's great. So cheers to technology lasting forever. It's a beast. I'm Chris Kapp. I am the Central Valley RHAB's Regional Manager for Coordinated Entry. And presenting today. Get up here. Why are you leaving me on my own? Both of you, man. What we're going to do is we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we're going to have you guys introduce yourselves. So go ahead and cheers. You.
Cheers. My name is Erica Matko, and I am the South Central RHAB Regional Manager. Good morning, everybody.
I am Kayla Gower. I work at Transitions of PA, and I'm the Domestic Violence Coordinated Entry Specialist.
Cool. And now we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. I'd like to know who you are, what county you're from, what agency you're from, and what you do there. So we'll go ahead and start here.
Gandhi, I'm the intern at Community Cares.
Here in Cumberland County. Okay.
I'm April Edwards. I work for Community Cares, and I'm the Support Services Coordinator.
Here in Cumberland County.
Cumberland County, yes.
Okay.
I'm Amy Rummel. I'm from Center County at Center Safe, and I'm the Director of Residential Services.
I'm Jean Riddle-Combs, and I'm from Huntington County, and I work at Huntington House, which is the domestic violence service program.
My name is Maria. I also am from Huntington County and work for Huntington House, and I'm the housing coordinator.
And I'm Rachel, also from Huntington House, Director of Services.
I'm Stacy Yerka. I'm from Franklin County. I am actually a housing specialist for our Access Center as well as also for Chippewa.
Back in the back. You guys, we have 2 seats up here. That's actually in my seat because I have to monitor that. Sorry. So, Simone, you want to introduce yourself? We're doing name, county, agency, and what you do at your agency.
Hi, I'm Simone McCray. I'm the outreach coordinator for Community Cares Emergency Shelter.
Here in Cumberland County.
Cumberland County.
Beth, Cumberland County Community Cares Homeless Shelter, Executive Director. I don't know what else to say. So we're the access site, we're the outreach, and we're the shelter.
All-around point person for Cumberland County.
I'm Tiffany Jones. I'm from Center for Community Action. We cover Bedford, Huntington, Fulton counties, and I'm the Director of Human Services.
Great.
I'm Alexis Wolters. I'm from Blair County Community Action, and I'm the Coordinated Entry Assistant Specialist.
I'm Maria Williams. I'm the Housing Specialist with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I'm just here today to support
You.
I'm Elizabeth Bellows. I'm with Cumberland County Housing Authority and Housing Case Manager at the Homeless Specialist. My name is Jackie King. I'm also if you're referring to I work at the Housing and I'm a special education.
My name is Kate Dean. I work at the Domestic Violence Services in Cumberland, Perry County. I'm a shelter assistant.
I'm Sonia Brown from Cumberland County Domestic Violence Services of Perry County, and I'm the shelter supervisor.
I'm Holly Bedford. I work with School Coordinating Crisis, School County on the counseling team.
Hey, I'm Sarah Goddard. I'm a case manager with School Coordinating Crisis.
Yay. So excited to have everybody here, and it's so good to have a mixture of DV providers and regular COC providers as well. Just a few housekeeping notes if you came in after I sort of just spewed them to everybody earlier. The bathroom is at the end of the hall. It is locked, and the key for it is on the big yellow block of wood. Take it with you if you don't want anybody else walking in on you when you're in there. There is coffee, there is water, there are granola bars on the table. There will be pizza for lunch. So help yourself if you need to get up and move around, if you need to get up and stand up and just get your legs moving while we're having the training, go for it. We're not formal people. You're not going to offend us if you have to stretch or take a call or whatever. There is a coat rack to hang up your coats if you would like. The Wi-Fi password is on the board. And with that, I think we are done with introductions. So we're gonna launch straight into our training for the day. We want to say hello to anybody who's watching via Skype link. Brendan has set up the Skype link for us. It is at the back of the room. You are on camera right now. So don't pick your nose unless you want everybody to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and give a quick overview of the coordinated entry, community queue, and HMIS in general. We all have a partnership agreement signed here, yes? Yes, we are good. All right, so I'm not even going to bother with the training site. Pardon me as I, carry my best friend, AKA my coffee mug with me. I'm nicer when I have it, so we'll just go with that. I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the actual community queue because that seems to be a great place to start. So when you log into Client Track, and some of you, especially DD providers, will have not seen this before. So we're going to just show you exactly what it looks like and sort of demystify it for everybody. All right, so welcome to Client Track. It is housed online on a secure server through Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. They are now fully staffed. They have some new staff members who onboarded a few weeks ago. They're trying to get things caught up. If you are an HMIS user and you're still having issues, be patient. They're working on it. They have an almost 7-month backlog that they're trying to weed through. So we appreciate what they're doing. When you look at Client Track, when you look at coordinated entry and HMIS, there are several parts of HMIS, and I apologize if my back is to you guys, but I have to see the screen. When you click that little blue button up there that I clicked, you get your carousel, and you're going to see there's support, providers, clients, and home. We're going to start with home, and it's going to show you your agency, your programs, and it's also where you're going to find your reports. So if you're looking to pull data for things, and this is just a very scratch the surface overview. If you're looking to pull data for things, you can pull your data here. And these are all of your reports. You can also contact the regional manager to pull data for you, and we will be happy to do that. Our provider tab is where you're going to actually find the community queue. It's also going to find your referral services for your organization if you take referrals through HMIS, as well as all of the pending referrals for your agency. In your menu, this is where you also will find the community queue, and we're going to look at now. Welcome to the community queue. Right now, we are seeing the entire queue for the entirety of the Eastern COC. There are currently 1,941 households on the queue, and that's over the entire 33 counties. We can filter this down. We can get really specific. So let's say we want to look at, and I'm just going to pick up Cumberland County because we're here. we're gonna pick Cumberland County. And you can filter by zone or by county. Does everybody know the difference between zone and county, or do we need to go there? Does everybody know that difference, or do you want me to, you don't know the difference? Okay. So the difference between zone and county is a county is a county. A zone is a group of counties that are clustered together that often have cross-county partnerships. Some RHABs have one county zones because they have massive counties. Some, like my RHAB, has 3 zones. I have 11 counties in my RHAB, broken up into 3 zones. Zone 5 is Mifflin, Juniata, and Northumberland County. And then because they all sort of have a lot of cross-service partnerships, Zone 6 Union and Schneider are in with Zone 5 as well. Zone 6 is Schuylkill, Columbia, Montour, and that little area up there. Zone 7 is Cumberland, Perry, and sometimes including Lebanon. Lebanon is a little bit of its own weird little animal because it's far away from everybody else. But there are often partnerships that happen between the agencies in those counties, and also a lot of movement of clients between those counties as well. So we can filter by zone, and that's how we have our Q calls as well, just by zone. So I'm not having, or Erica's not having 11 by name list meetings. We're having 3, or she has 4, I have 3. So we get multiple counties on the phone at one time and sort of knock them out because, again, cross movement. It also helps break down silos between the counties as well. As HUD regionalizes grants and as the COC regionalizes things, the zones become more and more important. But right now, for the sake of what we're doing, we've filtered by Cumberland County. There are currently 190 households on the queue. Now we can filter it by subpopulation. Now, in the assessment process, which we're going to talk about at length this afternoon, people are asked a series of questions that will categorize them into these specialized subpopulations, each of which there are different programs that service each of these populations. Like you might have a chronic program where you have to have a disability of some kind and be chronic. So you can filter by both of those. And so let's say, I have a permanent supportive housing project that the criteria say you have to be chronic and you have to have a physical disability. I'm going to filter for chronic homelessness. That takes it down to 38 households that are qualified as chronic. Now I'm going to filter it even more by people who are chronic and have a physical health issue. That knocks it down to 34. Much more of a manageable list to weed through than 1,900 some odd, right? So that is your community queue. Now let's look at an actual record and what it looks like. So we have the date that's been added to the wait list, their HMIS ID number, which is the number that is assigned to them in the system. That becomes very important if it is a person who is fleeing domestic violence, because that is the only identifier that they have. If they are not an anonymized record, the name will show up, a contact phone number, and now here's the household breakdown. Adult males, adult females, children, and the total household size. County of prior residence, which can be important for some programs as well. Available zones are where they want to be. This becomes important, especially the counties, especially for people fleeing domestic violence. They may not be safe in their home county. So they may say, I'm here in Cumberland County. I need to not be here. I need to get as far away as possible. Let's go to Schuylkill County. right? Let's go to Huntington County. Let's go to Allentown to get me as far away as possible from danger. So that's where they want to be. The SPDAT type is what kind of assessment was done. Family means there's at least one child under 18 in the household. A single means it's a household with just adults or a single person. And a youth SPDAT is done on youth under 24 who are not parenting. And here's their score. We'll talk about let's just suffice to say for now, we need to start thinking about the community queue and about the assessments as a triage, much like an emergency room. You go to the emergency room, Kayla stubbed her toe, right? She's not sure if it's broken, but she's not going to die, right? She needs an x-ray. She's in pain. She thinks she might have broken her toe. But Maria comes in right after Kayla, and Maria has fallen out of a tree, and
It's very possible.
you know, it's very possible. Maria fell out of a tree, and her arm bone is sticking through her wrist. All of a sudden, Kayla's stubbed toe, even though it probably still hurts, Maria's bleeding. Maria has a bone sticking out of her arm. Maria needs treated before Kayla, right? But then Erica comes in, and Erica, you know, wasn't watching what she was doing and got hit by a truck. So now all of a sudden Maria's arm isn't as critical as Erica, who has, you know, multiple serious injuries. So the community queue is like that. When you are assessed, you're given a score based on your vulnerability, and where you are on the list is based on the severity of your vulnerability. And I know they're over there laughing at me because I just made Erica, you know, be hit by a truck. It's okay. I feel the love. So now the subpopulations are listed. Just so at a glance, we know what subpopulations they fall into. Are they chronic? Yes or no? Just at a glance, we know. Do they have a mental health diagnosis? Are they working with a case manager? What do they score for, permanent, supportive, or rapid? Are they seeking shelter? Are they unsheltered? Seeking other services and their status. And we will talk about statuses. I think Erica's actually going to be talking about statuses at length, so I'm not going to go there. And then you can't really see this because my projector's dying, but the days in the status are how long they've been sitting there without any kind of change on the list, and Erica will address that as well. The last intake note date, like when did somebody write in their file, and who wrote it. So there's your breakdown of the community queue. We will look at this in depth later. This is just your basic introduction. If we hop back over to the client tab, you'll see the last person you worked with or looked at. And this is where you're going to find your coordinated entry intake. Now this is really, really important. If you are doing a regular intake, you're going to put all this information in to see if it comes up. You know, here, let's say Sonia Brown comes in. I just want your name right? Good. Let's see. All of these possible, nope, Sonia's not in there, so we know that she's new in the system. It's going to bring up, you can search by all of these things to make sure that if she's touched the system before, we're just going to update that record instead of creating duplicate records, which is really neat. It's a way to have a big picture of a person's history and not a fractured picture, because it's a lot to ask a person who's in crisis to remember every single time they've touched with a social services agency or with the system. So we're taking that burden off of them by having these unified records. However, if you have someone who's fleeing domestic violence, this can be very dangerous because abusers don't have a stereotype right? Abusers can be anywhere. And I often tell this story, and I will tell it again. You may have heard it if you've been in a training with me. We want to do everything we can to make sure that people fleeing domestic violence are safe. Even if their abusers are people in a position of power within our system. When I was a kid, my dad was mayor of Cincinnati. He was universally loved by everybody in the city. And he was also an abusive jerk. And my mother took us twice and tried to get us away and hide from him. And he used his power as the mayor of Cincinnati to find us. And he used the system to bring us back. And I don't want anybody to ever have that happen because of coordinated entry. So we have taken great pains to make sure that that will never happen to anybody in coordinated entry. So if somebody says that they are fleeing domestic violence, if my projector wasn't dying, you would see that this is a big gold button. You click that, and all of the identifying information goes away. Period. We don't ask. No names, no genders, no household size, nothing. They are identified by an HMIS anonymized number only. And they're set up with a password that they choose, so that when a provider does call, they can say, I'm so-and-so from such and such an agency, and your password is blah, blah, blah. And therefore people know that it's safe to talk. So, and Kayla will be covering that in a lot more depth later, but that is the start of an anonymized intake. Does anybody have any questions just in general about HMIS before we start getting into the real nitty-gritty of things? No? Yes? Good? All right. The last thing I want to talk about before we flip over to Erica at 10:30 is how to get help if HMIS decides to be obnoxious, which it does on occasion because technology does that. To get help with HMIS, you're going to go up to your carousel, go to support, and you'll see this is all of you. If you have a ticket, I still have one open ticket. But if you need help, if something is broken, you go up there. Did you see what I did? I'll do it again. Up by your name is a little help button. You're going to click that. We're no longer sending emails to the HMIS help desk. We're using this so that everything is in one spot. So what you're going to do is click report an issue, and this little happy thing will come up. So we don't even have to leave HMIS anymore. This is super great because we can do it right in the program, and you can do it right from the screen that you're on. So what you'll do is, this is your subject line, make it count, just saying, help, it's broken, probably not a great subject line. But, you know, HMIS number 195432 won't scrub is a great subject line. And then you're going to type in your issues, attach your screenshots, and then hit submit. And it will go to HMIS staff. And you will get an email back. You will get an email to whatever email you put in as where you need a response, saying, you know, this is received. And then when the guys get to it, they will send an email saying a note has been posted about such and such a ticket. And then you can click into your open tickets, and you can read what they've written, which is great. And he and I have been having quite the discussion about that ticket. So, any questions about getting help with HMIS? And this works in both sides of HMIS, by the way. So for those of you who use it for case management, outreach, etc., that help ticket is for both sides.
Oh, we use it.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm sure you do. Oh, look at that. If there are no overview of HMIS questions, I'm going to turn it over to Erica and set up her PowerPoint for her.
First, do you think we're going to your computer cluster?
To what? That's the only place that we can put it at. Well, we can give people the PowerPoint later.
I'm trying to do the health thing right now. To add me. I already did it. Me.
Yeah,
Yeah, we will post.
I'm trying to have my name.
Apologies that the screen is not great, but that's really the only place we can stick the computer in the room.
Okay, I've already signed the contract.
You can also add the problem on how he was not at it. I couldn't put names in it. None of that. It says it, but on my choices.
Hang tight.
I have a ticket.
Okay, I need you to come here.
I mean, this audio, the audio might have to be used later, yeah, in
which less time homeless. Helen had sent out coordinated entry and intake notes, there were a couple slides a while ago. I did take some of that information to put in here as well. Put a note in. Initial contact with the client. So this would be more geared towards those who work at access sites or 211. So that initial contact note is the initial time that a client is calling into 211 or coming into an access site. A note is also put in anytime there's any contact with the client, no matter how short that contact was, whether it was over the phone or in person. There's also a note put in anytime a client is being engaged or they're being enrolled into a program. Notes should be put in when the client is doing the housing search. So after the enrollment has already been completed, and then also when a client has moved house. So pretty much we should be documenting that initial contact the whole way through until they're actually housed into a program. All right, so your first note, your initial placement note. This is the information that you should be including in these initial notes. Where did the client sleep last night? So a location as exact as possible. What town were they staying? Who did they sleep in? Was it a park? What was the name of the park? The street they stayed on, the shelter name, etc. Now, it also goes differently when we're dealing with an anonymous record. We don't put any detail in there, as little detail as possible.
So,
Yes.
you're saying in addition to the coordinated entry, you want a note placed saying where they slept, so that, is that what you're saying?
So like when we go to hit that button that says place on community queue.
Right.
That auto-generated thing, I always take that out and you put exactly what's going on with the person, the time that they make that initial contact.
Okay.
So how long has the client been homeless? A brief homeless history. What will the household composition look like when housed? Sometimes it can be different from that initial contact with an individual. It might be a single adult coming in who is hoping, maybe he has children and he's attempting to get his children back, but he can't until he's housed. Remain the same? Will it change? Is the client fleeing DV? Is the client a veteran? We do have some individuals that may be fleeing domestic violence that don't exactly want to go into the system anonymously. And so what's really important is that it is documented somewhere that they are fleeing, as long as they give permission for us to document that. Because what we do see is that if it's not documented in there, sometimes there will be individuals that may be accidentally scrubbed off because they're put into the system and it's not done correctly and everything like that. Did the client refuse any referrals? This is also important to document, especially if they call in a second time and there wasn't a referral sent to the shelter the first time. If that's documented in the intake note, the individual who takes the phone call is going to know that, oh, okay, so you didn't want a shelter referral before. Would you like a shelter referral this time? Like, why didn't you want one? Not so much why didn't you want one, but is that something that you're interested in now? Or not? Is there anything else about the client that would be important for other providers to know? Also, is there anything out of the box info that needs documented? Sometimes I'll come across clients that, I'm checking assessments and it wasn't completed. So why wasn't that assessment completed with the individual? Did something happen? Did the phone call end? Is this individual going to be housed with another person who's already on the community queue? So that we know that when it comes time, we can merge those records together. So here's an example of an initial placement note. So client A called into 211 on October 6, 2019, stating that he has been sleeping in his car near Sheets on 17th Street in Blair County for the last 7 days. He stated that his daughter is staying with a family member until he can secure housing. A family de-estimate was completed. The client stated that the best way to reach him is via his cell phone before 3 p.m. The client works second shift at Dollar General on 5th Avenue and is unable to be reached after 3 p.m. So right now we have a good idea of how long he's been homeless for, where he's been staying. We know he has employment, and we know what the best time is to reach him. We also know where that employment is in case we aren't able to reach him via phone. The client stated that during the day the best place you could find him is at the library on 6th Avenue between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. The client wishes to remain in Blair County if possible, but is willing to move to Cambria County. Referrals were sent to local shelters, and the client record was placed in the community queue for housing. Another thing that we could add in there as well, with the client wishes to remain in Blair County but would be willing to reside in Cambria County, is whether or not that client has reliable transportation to get to that county. It would also be important to put in that note because sometimes we have clients who say that they're willing to travel to other counties when they don't have any transportation. And a lot of providers aren't able to provide that transportation for them to relocate to a different county, depending on the provider. Any questions about any of that so far?
Well, maybe that topic there. You're saying, so are we dissuading them from putting themselves on other counties if we, in fact, verify they don't have?
This afternoon.
Yes.
That's its own whole topic.
Yes.
That has to do with what we initially do with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I would say to that, like right now, is that
because we definitely
don't want to persuade them from not going to other counties, but if they don't have the reliable transportation to get to another county, it's going to be really hard for them to get there. But Chris will talk about that in a little bit. Okay. Did anybody else have any questions? Okay. So additional notes. So these notes would be any notes that are taking place after that initial contact. Where did the client sleep last night? You want to make sure you're getting that information every time that we talk to a client. Program type associated with the note. So what type of program is reaching out to the client? Provider with staff name mentioned. Location of the provider, county, any new details learned. Did their situation change at all? Did we have to update an assessment? Did they call in 3 months later and their situation has changed? They're still, say they were sleeping in their car, but now they're not able to get in their car anymore and they're on the street now. Those would be other things that we would want to update. Why a status change, which I'm going to go into more detail about that as well. Date of any scheduled next steps, and then if they're denying services, explain why. So lack of diagnosis doesn't meet criteria. So that's more so if a provider is reaching out and they're trying to provide assistance to the client, and then they're denying that service. Say they stated that they were willing to relocate to, say, Bedford County. They're in Blair County. They say they're willing to relocate to Bedford County at the time of the initial assessment. Tiffany is reaching out to them to see, if they're still willing to come. They say, no, I'm no longer interested in moving to Bedford County. I don't have transportation. At that time, she could put a note in there saying that they're denying services in that county, and then also document that they're removing their county from the client record. So an example of additional notes. So this is kind of from start to finish. So Blair County Family Services Shelter on October 9, 2019, first attempt to contact the client to see if he is still in need of shelter. Left the voicemail to return call and ask for Bob. I will attempt to call again tomorrow. The client ends up calling back in on the same date. He called into the shelter and stated that he was still in need of shelter. Client is scheduled to come in for an intake on the following day at 9 a.m. So now we have another provider, somebody from Blair County Community Action, their rapid rehousing program, called client in on 10/19 to set up an intake. Client stated that he's currently shelter. Intake is scheduled for 10/20/2019. Status is updated to engaging. Another note was put in stating that on the 19th, the 20th it should have been, client A completed his intake. Client is currently searching for housing. Status is updated to enrolled. Client stated that he remains at the shelter until he finds housing. Next note, client A located in an apartment in Altoona, and inspection is scheduled for 10/22/2019 at 9 a.m. Client is still at the shelter. These notes making sense? So that if another provider is going in to see what's going on with this client, the biggest thing that you're going to look at is that status. If that status is being updated to engaging and enrolled, you should know at that point that a provider is trying to assist that client and get them into housing. That's why I say it's so important that we update the statuses, which we'll talk a little bit more about updating the statuses in real time, because what can happen is that other providers start reaching out, and it's like, oh no, I'm working with this other provider already, I have an inspection set up, and if there aren't any notes in there, or if the statuses aren't being updated, that provider has no idea what's going on.
And conversely, if the status still says engaging and that agency has stopped trying to reach out and hasn't changed the status back to new, a client could miss out on a housing opportunity because they think another agency is working with that person.
So to finish this out, on the 22nd, the client and case manager went to check out the apartment. It passed the inspection. Lease is scheduled to be signed on 10/23 at 9 a.m. On 10/23, the client came in, signed the lease, and was housed. Status is updated to house. This way, we know from start to finish with this client, the notes were all updated. We knew exactly what was going on. We knew when they were engaging, when the client was enrolled, the intake had been completed, and then when they were housed. Another reason why it's so important to have those notes in there, say this client's house, a provider houses them for 6 months. They're capable of, paying for their housing at that point. They're closed out of the program, everything like that. Well, then 6 months later down the road, the client shows back up on the queue again. They're needing assistance, they're homeless again. Having those detailed notes in there will help somebody out whenever they're calling back in, so we can get an idea, oh, okay, well, this person was assisted back in October, what was going on, and then from that point forward, we can keep things updated. Any questions about those notes? Or anything? Just some tips to remember. Once you attempt to engage the client, there must be 3 notes within 5 days documenting those attempts. Additional contacts are also documented. So when a provider starts that engagement process, there needs to be 3 attempts within 5 days. Each of those attempts should be documented in the intake notes. That way, if they're no longer engaging, another provider who's going in to attempt to engage can see, okay, Center for Community Action reached out 3 times, they weren't able to get a hold of them. I'm going to attempt to get a hold of them. Status changes, anytime there's an increase or a decrease of involvement that takes place, a note needs to be entered. So kind of like Chris mentioned, whether you're engaging and then you're no longer engaging, a note needs to be entered in there as to why that status was updated, or why was it changed back to new. Change in assessment, profile data, a note needs to be entered. This is especially for the access sites as well. If a client calls in to get their assessment updated or if their situation changes, what's really important, I'm not sure if Chris will touch on this or not, but any changes to the assessment itself needs to be documented in that intake note. Like what questions were updated, were there any answers changed, things like that, because right now there's not a way in the system that keeps track of what changes are being made, so it gives us a good idea as to what is being updated, and we should also be using the same assessment that they completed prior and updating that assessment instead of putting a new assessment in there.
And you should be letting your regional manager know if you're doing that as well. Okay. That needs to be a conversation you have with your regional manager if you're going to be touching somebody's VSPADAX after it's originally done.
Okay.
So, and we will talk about that at length this afternoon.
Notes can or should be emailed to any HMIS or CES provider if the update is relevant to a shared or potentially shared client. Especially if you're not sure if they're going to be able to go in right away to see what's going on. I get emails from providers all the time like, hey, this person is working with this, is working with us, but they're still going to need your assistance. Like, I just wanted to give you a heads up, this is what's going on. If you have any other questions regarding notes or things that whether they should or shouldn't be put in there, you can always contact your regional manager with questions.
I have a little question. Sorry, just when you're saying, so when you note on there 3 attempts were made by this provider to contact this person, is the assumption then that other providers won't also attempt to reach them?
Yes.
My only question is because I feel like sometimes people are like, I don't want that service. Mm-hmm. Is that understood to the client? Does that make sense?
The 3 times in 5 days only so that there aren't multiple agencies reaching out at the same time. Once you're done, other agencies can reach out.
Okay. So they will continue to reach out.
Yes. If that status is changed to engaging, other providers shouldn't really be looking at that record unless it's back to new. Because they know somebody else is already reaching out. So let me I gave a handout with some status changes and when you should change update statuses. If anybody did not get one, if anybody not get one of this, you don't. Anybody else? Anybody else can say more? Thank you. So these are the community care status changes. It just kind of gives an overview as to when you need to be changing the statuses. So I did review this already. So an engaging status should always be changed once you decide that you're going to be assisting somebody with your. So when you're attempting to contact the client, remember it's important to at least make the 3 attempts within 5 days. The individual will remain in the engaged status until an intake has been completed. Also make sure to document all attempts in the coordinated entry system, as well as when the intake is scheduled. At that point, the status is updated to enrolled. Once that intake is completed. The status is changed to enrolled once an individual has completed an intake and is in the process of looking for housing. Also, again, make sure that you're documenting all communication between you and the client during that time. The status is changed to housed once the client has officially moved into their permanent housing. Document that the client has been housed in the coordinated entry system. You will also need to house them from the community queue, which I believe, Chris, will you be showing them?
Yes.
I'll do that
Yes.
later. So this is just a nice little cheat sheet for you to keep beside you whenever you're in the process of getting somebody or working with somebody within the system. My name is also and case managers and things and all. But so does anybody have any other questions regarding notes and what should be in them and what shouldn't be in them? Anything? Yes.
For us, it's we're sheltered. We wouldn't necessarily be doing any of this stuff. Just when we do the coordinated entries and sort of walking by, we would be noting that we did do it. But none of this other stuff really pertains to what we do.
So the only time that you would be changing statuses is if, does your shelter provide any type of housing?
No. We don't. We help with housing.
The only thing you would not update any statuses. Okay. You would still put your notes in there if somebody's coming into shelter, but you wouldn't have to change any statuses. And that's an important thing too. The statuses are not updated to engaging or enrolled if they're just entering the shelter, unless your shelter also provides housing. Right. That's the only time that those statuses should be changed is when a provider is engaging in attempting to get somebody housed.
But back to notes though, it is important for shelters to keep their notes updated. Yes. So that we know that people are still in shelter, so that they don't get tossed off the queue for inactivity. Because we do have to go through the queue, and if there's no activity on the account in 90 days, you put them over onto the historical queue. So you do need to keep saying, even if it's just one sentence, client is still sheltered at blah, blah, blah.
I know, like with my providers, like in our scrub calls, like we do review those, and if if they're still on there and you're still engaging or they're still enrolled, I know finding housing can be very difficult right now. I'm always asking at least put a note in there every 30 days as to what's going on with that person so that I have an update so they're not being accidentally scrubbed, which is a great place to bring it back over to Chris. Is going to talk about scrubbing. Right? I think that's what's next. I suppose. All right. Switch. One of you needs to monitor Erica, can you monitor the chat? Yeah. Are you on Stealing my papers. I know, I don't know where I'm stealing my papers. Okay. Back to client tracking. That is my kitty. Her name is Tippy. She's feral, but she's very cute. She's my gutter kitty. I found her when she was a week old. Oh, valid password. Great. All right. All right, we're going to talk about maintaining the community queue.
which means we have to get to the community queue. Is there anybody here from Zone 5? Other than Kayla? Cool, we're gonna pick on them because there's nobody in the room from there. Okay, so talking about updating and maintaining the community queue. You might hear us mention things like a by name list call, a community queue call, affectionately also known as scrub calls, which are not what they're called anymore, but it's what they were called for a really long time. So we tend to still refer to them as that, even though it's not their name.
What's their name now?
By name list meetings or community queue meetings.
Scrub call.
It's a scrub call. It's a little nicer than scrub, because a scrub call is a little bit of a misnomer. We're not having the calls just to get rid of people off the queue. Like, that's not the point of the calls. The point of the calls are to work together to maintain the queue, to talk about, excuse me, to talk about updates. Go ahead and laugh, Stacy, it's fine. Stacy's just gonna laugh at me. To talk about updates that we might have to the system, updates on trainings, updates in general, to coordinated entry, and also to sort of work together to brainstorm how to help some of the people that are a little bit higher maintenance than others. Each of the regional managers runs their calls a little differently. I can only speak to what I do. And I generally break my scrub calls down into 3 parts. The first one is updates, and I do updates from COC, DCED, me, in general, what's going on in that RHAB, what's going on in that zone. Is there anything that is happening that everybody needs to be aware of? Like right now, we're talking about the point in time count and how coordinated entry can fit into the point in time count. So on my queue calls, we've been discussing how we can utilize coordinated entry for the point in time. So that's the first section. The second section is the main part of the call, and that's about 45 minutes, where we actually look at the list name by name by name. Sometimes we start from the top and just plow through and go all the way down as far as we can in 45 minutes. Sometimes we will look at a specific subpopulation. We might look at, I might notice there are a whole lot of real young people on the queue. So we might look at anybody who's been given a TAE SPDAT, which is for under 24. We'll look at them first, or we'll do a DB specific queue call. If we see that there are a lot of people on the queue that are fleeing DB, we might talk specifically about how we can help some of them. We've done all sorts of subpopulations. Sometimes we only look at people that are scoring for rapid, or only look at people who are scoring for permanent. So just sort of talk through what's going on with them. Another population I like to look at on my scrub calls, on my queue calls, trying to break the habit, so hard, are people who have been on the queue for a good long time. So how can we help them? So what we do is we generally, and again, this is just how I run my calls, we'll go over and see what is their status, how long have they been in status, when was the last note written, and then we will generally click into their notes log and see what's up. So this one is fairly easy because we see, they were placed on the community queue on 12/20. They were enrolled with transitions on 1/10, and they're currently looking for housing. Okay, great. So let's say we're on our February Q call now, and nothing has been updated. I'm gonna say, okay, transitions, do we have an update? And transitions will say, oh, they're, still looking for housing, or, oh, she found housing, or, oh, she's no longer, interested in our program. Okay, you need to make a note about that. And then we'll move on to the next one. So remind people to make a note if notes haven't been made, and then move on. The other thing we could do, let's say we get to this person and it's now February and they're still there and nothing has been written, and transitions says, yeah, I'm really having a hard time with this one. Here's the situation, blah, 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 blah. This is where this sort of zone mentality comes in, and this case conferencing mentality comes in. Because let's say this client is looking for housing, but she's having a little bit of a hard time because, I don't know, she's burned some bridges with some landlords in this area, in this end of the county. Another agency might be able to pop in and say, well, I have a relationship with this landlord on the other side of the county, and if I vouch for this person, this landlord will probably rent to her. Now there's a side conversation happening, right, between these two agencies, and these two agencies are working together. One of the really cool things that we've done on the scrub call, this is my favorite thing that has ever happened on the scrub call, and it was, oh, it's Maria. Sorry, I always keep looking because we have public coming in and out of here, so they know not to come in, but sometimes they still try. The coolest thing that ever happened on a scrub call so far for me happened in Schuylkill County about a year ago. We had a woman fleeing domestic violence. She was staying at a motel in a very, very rural area. She was a registered nurse, highly employable, but didn't have a car. She couldn't get a job because she couldn't physically get to a job. There was no public transit. She didn't have a vehicle. So during one of our in-person Q calls, because every once in a while, I like to see your faces. So I just show up and say, we're going to have this one in person. So we're sitting around the table at SAM, and there were some pastors there who have a partnership agreement signed because they have pastors' discretionary funds. And this pastor said, if she could get a vehicle, she could get a job. If she could get a job, she might not even need rapid rehousing. She might just be able to get housing, right? So we had a huge, long discussion about this person. Pastor went back to his congregation and said, can't tell you any details, but I have somebody whose life would be a lot better if they could have a car. And somebody in the congregation said, my husband just died and I still have a car. Car was donated. This person got a job. Another church said, we're going to pay her hotel bills so that she could bank every penny of her paycheck. Within 3 months, she was off the queue, in housing, did not need a subsidy, and was completely stable. That's the power of what we're doing with coordinated entry. They didn't need to know any details. They knew that they needed help. Here's the deal. Here's what's going on. Only the people in the room know what's happening. But by working together, we were able to find a solution for a person who had a really, really tough situation. And sometimes it's that easy. Sometimes we see a person who scores really low on the list and they only score 4 or 5. They're probably never going to get pulled for rapid rehousing. They're probably never going to get a subsidy. They might not actually need one. They might just need a little oomph to get over the edge. So we're working on cultivating these non-traditional partnerships with people who have discretionary funds or prevention funds, so that we can say, maybe this person only needs security in first month's rent to get stable again. And we can call on that partnership and we can say, let's get this person sort of moved along. So that's what we do with the queue meetings. One of the things though that we have to do is keep the queue up to date. We can do a lot more of this roundtabling discussion to learn more about the situation, because we all know that the more information we have and the more complete of a picture we have of people, the easier it is to help them, right? We can't do that if we're constantly using the queue meetings to say, we need to change statuses. We have to make sure your statuses are changed. Why is this person still listed as engaging when nobody's engaging? Or why is this person listed as enrolled and there's no note saying what agency has enrolled them? Or is this person even still homeless? We spend a lot of time asking people, on the calls, have you heard from this person? Oh, well, yeah, they're still homeless. They're still, living in their car at the Flying J. Or they're still at the shelter. They're still at the motel, fleeing from their abuser. We need to know this stuff so that we can keep these conversations going. Because if we're just spinning our wheels on keeping the queue updated and maintained, we're not actually doing anything to get people off the queue. So keeping notes updated, very, very important. One of the things that we are having an issue with is people being afraid to scrub. People have this weird phobia about taking people off the list, even when they know they're housed. HUD has a very strict definition of what constitutes homelessness. Kinevento has a much better definition of what constitutes homelessness, but we are bound by HUD's definition of homelessness, which means if they're couch surfing, they have to come off. If they are in a hotel that they are paying for themselves, they have to come off. If they are doubled up with another family or go home to their family members, even if you think, oh, this is not going to work, they're going to come back, they have to come off. The only exception is
They must be. Okay. I think they're in Cumberland now.
Then all of that goes out the window. They could be in their own home and still be on the queue. Because we want to make sure that we get people out of bad situations. So that's why, again, notes about if somebody chooses to not have an anonymized record and they are fleeing domestic violence, that's why the notes are so important to write, this person is fleeing domestic violence. So that we, hang on just a second, so that we know not to scrub them. Like if we see in a note, client is staying with a friend. If there's nothing that indicates that they're fleeing domestic violence, I have to take them off the list. So, yes, and then Beth has a question.
Another thing with that is when I'm going through and looking at the community queue and I come across somebody who said that they're staying with a friend, it takes a lot to have to go back and look at their records, see what their pre-screen stated, if they are fleeing DV and it was an override. It's a lot easier if you just document that, because then it's taking away time that I can, be focusing on other things. I have to go back through and look at the pre-screen and see what's going on with the person.
Right.
Or even checking the statuses when people are enrolled,
Okay, a complicated and highly common thing.
Okay.
Is those that have a certain limited income and will pay for a hotel for half the month, and then try and find someone to pay for the other half. So every time we know they're paying on their own, we take them off and put them back on?
Yep, it's literally a button. Here, let me show you. It's super easy.
But is it their responsibility to tell us they have someone else paying for them? Or do we just...
If you find out,
right,
do it. Don't seek them out, but if you find out, then yes. But it's super easy. You just go to status, closed, did not meet homeless housing need requirements, boom, done.
So that's our note for that time.
Yep,
Basically taking them out.
yep,
And then it's really on them to remind either 211 or the access site
Correct.
that they're, or
Correct.
can they remind any agency?
they can, any agency that has HMIS access can, put them back. But the easiest thing you could say is, you know, if you find out, you say, we have to take you off the queue, but if you become homeless again, and if you meet the definition, call 211 and let them know.
Now, what does that do to their chronic status? Each time reset?
It depends, because instances of homelessness also affect chronic
Yeah, how
status.
frequent, you're us.
We will have an offline chat about this, because it is a
It's common here.
common and complicated situation. We will have an offline chat about this during lunch.
And also make sure, like, if you are going in and you're changing them to clothes, that you just still put a note in there.
Yes,
No, I
That they
understand
were,
that,
that they
yeah.
were removed.
Yes.
Local
So,
retreats.
don't be
Hi,
afraid
local
to
retreats. What do you
take
think?
people off the queue. They don't disappear. They don't disappear. There are two lists. There is the active list and then historical.
He is. That's right.
Yes.
He says, "Why don't you have treats?" No, that's okay. It's not her fault. She had no idea you're going to be here.
Microphone on the Skype, please.
Okay, that's good.
All right, so there's an active queue and there's an historical queue. So nobody ever really goes away, right? So right now we're looking at people who actively need help. You can change this and go to historical and see who was homeless in the past, but is not currently. So, and it's real simple, so flip them right back. So don't be afraid. Yes, Karen.
So for me, if somebody leaves, they just disappear on us. We don't take them off the queue, we don't know that they're.
If you don't know where they went, you just make a note saying, you know, client has left, cares whereabouts unknown. And we will let them sit for the 90 days, and then if nobody hears from them, then we will take them off. Yep. So it's very simple. Please don't be afraid. You're not going to irreparably harm anyone by moving them to historical, right? You're not, I promise. If you know somebody is not homeless, just move them to historical. We can always switch them back to active if we find out. You look like you have a question.
I do kind of sort of.
Okay.
So if a DV, client is in, say, Dauphin County, you won't remove her if she's housed?
Is she still fleeing or is she housed?
Yeah.
If she's housed and she's safe and she's no longer fleeing, then yes, you would take her off.
Even if it's Dauphin County?
Yeah. Yeah, because you would say housed and then, or self-resolved or whatever. Doesn't matter if she's housed in our county. The point is she homeless or is she fleeing? If she's safely housed in a stable situation and she says she's not fleeing anymore and she's good, then we take her off. So don't be afraid. And if you have a question, call your regional manager. Shoot us an email. We will help you when you're in the weeds like that, because the weeds are thick. The weeds are real thick.
And you're gonna come across that more often than not with the crossover of counties
Yes.
and people saying that they're willing to
Yes.
live in multiple
Absolutely.
locations, so you're gonna come
Stacey.
in contact
So I
with
do have
them.
a question, because coming from doing the phone calls,
Yes.
the individuals coming in, I know my question is always, where did you sleep last night?
Mhm.
But we all have those situations. For example, we know that there is a very good chance in this area come Friday night, we're gonna get a nasty storm here. We don't have enough space in our shelter or cold weather shelters. They call in Monday, they got housed just for those couple emergency nights with family, but they're right back out on the street come Monday or Tuesday.
We will chat about that during.
Okay. Because that's been a
Yeah,
very common.
it's a very common situation in this area. We will chat about that during lunch. So, all right, any other questions about maintaining the queue? Please keep your notes updated. It's so important. And please don't just wait until the day before your scrub call to update your notes. Like seriously, it makes our lives so much harder as regional managers because we're looking at the queue all the time. And people's 90 days are coming up all the time. The 90 days aren't just at the scrub calls. So please, 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 at least look at the queue once a week. Set aside an hour or two once a week to update your notes, even if it's just a sentence. Client is still homeless. You know, that's fine. That's all I need to know. If you have more, great. If you get in the weeds and you need help, call one of us. That's literally our job. It's what we're here for, is when the weeds are thick, we can talk to each other. We have this massive group chat between all of the regional managers, and it gets dicey sometimes because the reality is that this system is still really new and it's evolving all the time, and we're figuring this out as we go. And when situations come up that are complex, and they come up all the time because crises are complex, we have to adjust, sometimes on the fly. And we're willing to do that, but we have to know when there's an issue. So please don't be afraid to scrub people and move them to historical. Scrubbing does not mean taking them out of the system. It just means putting them on the historical queue. They don't go away. There is no way to erase a record in this system unless you are a regional manager. None of you can break it, I promise. I promise. So please don't be afraid to update your notes. Don't be afraid to change statuses. Don't be afraid to scrub. It is everyone's place to help keep this queue manageable. Any questions? Any questions on the chat?
Nope, none.
Okay. Well, then we will go ahead and let you guys have a happy bathroom and stretch break. So take a break.
How long?
We're still missing one person. Maybe on a call or do other things. So before jumping right in, I just want to also alert everybody on Skype too, and these are in the handouts that I gave everybody else. I gave the Creating Access for Survivors Category 4 homelessness definition document for the fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. So this document was shared in a previous training that Lee Howard and Maria Williams just recently did. I believe it was on the 17th. The training was best practices for working with domestic violence survivors. So I know that she spent a lot of time covering that topic in that training. That training is available on the resource library on the Eastern COC website page. Is under the resource link. If you go in, it has the PowerPoint listed there, and it also has like the live recording of the video as well. So I don't want to spend like too much time on this today, just because I know that Maria and Lee had already gone pretty in depth into the surrounding of the definition and what constitutes fleeing. If we do have questions related to that, I think we could maybe talk about it more like during case conferencing time. If you're having a situation that's coming up and you're not sure it's fleeing or if it's meeting what you think the definition of fleeing would be, we can kind of talk about that a little more during that time. But it is a really good resource, so I just want to encourage everybody to read over it as well. And I'll just read the definition while we're standing here, or what you need to meet category 4. So the survivor must be fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against the individual or family member, including child, that has either taken place within the individual's family, primary nighttime residence, or has made the individual or family afraid to return to their primary nighttime residence. And then there's the ands in this definition as well. So, and they have no other residence, and they lack the resources and support networks to obtain other permanent housing. So with that, I'm going to jump into the next slide here. So I started at Transitions of PA in, I want to say May of 2018 as a housing advocate. So I was doing direct service, working in Safe House with survivors that we had taken in due to safety issues. So again, they were residing in our 30-day emergency shelter. When I started at the agency, they already kind of had the framework started for the rapid rehousing program. Some of our great leaders that were working there way before me and had already identified this as an issue, sought funding for rapid rehousing. So they put in our application through HUD, submitted that to HUD, and we are receiving both ESG, so Emergency Solutions Grant funding, and BOC funding. So we're getting both of those at this time. But prior to that, we really only had relocation dollars, and we were seeing a need to address the follow-up issues. So again, 30 days is not very long. If you have somebody that's coming out of shelter, for them to stabilize and get their self situation where they're going to be able to maintain on their own and maybe not return to their abuser because of things like financial means. They might be solely dependent on that person. Maybe they've alienated all of their family. Nobody's really willing to help them out at this point because they've burned a lot of bridges in being with the abuser. So I think most of us in this room, when we're kind of conducting ourselves in daily life and work, we're kind of looking at like what our mission is at our agency or organization or nonprofit. That's kind of our guiding force that tells us what we need to focus on, what we need to do for our population that we're serving. So I'm just going to read you Transitions mission to start. Transitions is a crisis center that provides advocacy, empowerment, and education to victims, survivors, families, and communities to end patterns of violence and abuse. So what was happening was prior to us receiving rapid rehousing funding, the agency really focused on kind of 3 key points, and I've looked at like our annual reports that we had and newsletters that came out in about 2016, 2015, and largely what Transitions was focusing on at that time was safety, education, and advocacy. So, a lot of, spreading our name and things like that surrounded our safe house and what we were doing within the communities, going out to the school districts, talking within the classrooms to the kids. Again, advocacy, so promoting activism and support, which could look like many things. So legal advocacy to survivors that are either coming into the safe house or community members, maybe wanting to seek a PFA or something like that. But again, we were still identifying that we were not really doing maybe everything we needed full circle to make sure that we're focusing maybe on that last point, which is ending the patterns of violence and abuse, and how are we going to maybe get to that point where we're breaking the cycle of power and control. So the team, again, this was prior to me coming, focused a lot on strategic planning. So they looked at, what are the barriers that our survivors are facing when they're going back into the community? So what are they accomplishing when they're in the safe house? And, how can we support them moving forward? In the past, and I also have an additional handout attached to your Creating Access for Survivors. There's 2 handouts in there. There's one that talks about kind of like the old model of housing and then the DV first model of housing. So initially in the past, there was a lot of focus on housing readiness and what can we do to get a survivor ready to be on their own. Developing those life skills, maybe doing, let's get them employment first prior to putting them in a unit and making sure that they're bringing in some type of income, because why are we gonna put them in a unit if they don't have some type of income? So now we've kind of done like a switch on most of you in this room, or some of you in this room. Again, I came in while this model was kind of in place already, so it's not super foreign to me, but I think for some people it was a big adjustment to kind of go from like a transitional housing model to DB housing first. So they didn't have to be employed, they didn't necessarily have to be clean of any substances. You don't need to make any strict guidelines about going to budgeting classes or something like that. We do provide ongoing case management for survivors that are enrolled in our rapid housing program. Can look like many things, but we don't, again, it's not a requirement, and we don't force those things to occur.
They were divorced, but if they were still
When transition started this endeavor, we used all of our resources and our experts, such as Maria Williams over here, to kind of guide us in the process. So I was talking to Sarah and Holly a little bit earlier about the fact that we already have standards in place, being victim service providers, the EMP, they know this as well, and our folks from Perry and Cumberland County, we all kind of have to focus a little bit more on, how we are maintaining confidentiality as well. So we have to, do a little bit more paperwork maybe and jump through a little more hoops to make sure that we're meeting the standards that we already have set up. So I would encourage everybody, if you're, concerned about creating documents in order to do rapid rehousing, or if you're applying for funding, I wasn't involved in any of the grant writing per se, but I can probably point you in the right direction of folks that maybe know a little bit more about that and the language that you want to use as well. But again, it's really focused on just making sure that they're in a unit now. So let's get them into a house and then accomplish all those goals afterward. So we're no longer worrying about making a client housing ready. We see that there's a need, we see that they need to be housed, and we're putting them in a unit. I also just want to touch briefly on, if anybody uses the HUD Exchange questions, you can submit a question to HUD Exchange if you're not sure that you're doing something accurately, or you just have a general question about something works. That's also a really good resource to use as well. And participate in all of your B&O calls, like Chris said. I can't stress enough the fact that part of the reason that we wanted everybody to come here today too was just to kind of meet each other, see each other's faces, so that we can kind of do that sharing of information. Especially if you're, on both sides, I guess, if you're coming from the DV world or you're just a general provider, it's going to be easier to make sure that those notes are updated and that nobody's falling through the cracks if we're talking to each other and communicating. So that when Chris pulled up that note earlier from, a transitions client that had been entered into the system, we work very closely with our community action agency in Sanger and Union County, as well as the CSO in Northumberland. And, if they see a DV client on the queue, they might call me and say, hey, I saw this person listed here, just wanted to see, are you engaging with them? Are you working with them? Maybe they're in our shelter, maybe it's just a community person. Maybe it's somebody that we referred to call into 211 to gain access. And we try to keep track of any HMIS numbers. So specifically, if somebody is coming into our shelter, we're doing paper VI spit outs with the clients. So what the 211 call center does, we do that, a paper version of that in person. So we're sitting down with the client, reviewing the questions. I'm then calling that assessment into CRISCAP, and the screen that she had up earlier for Client Track, where she showed you the DV anonymous intake. I am verbatim reading the client's answers, and she's entering them into the system for us. So, and then, you know, part of our job is to then help keep track of that HMIS number. That could look like many different things. Again, you could create an Excel spreadsheet that lists your clients. I think most people in here use ETO as far as victim service providers, right? So if you're listing the ETO number and then the HMIS number, maybe creating an additional face sheet for that, as well as their password, so that you have both of those to be able to search for the client. And then you can engage with myself and Chris and Erica to make sure that notes are being updated. As victim service providers, we're not going to have access to put the notes into the system, so it's our job to make sure that we're reaching out to the regional managers or your local access site or whoever can enter the note for you to make sure it's updated. Because in the long run, if we're not updating those notes and keeping the information accurate, we're really just hurting the survivor, because this is supposed to be their one access point to getting this housing. So if we're not keeping the notes updated, I mean, why are we referring them to use the system if they're not able to be contacted? Okay. I'm drawing on that one topic. So I know that Maria also touched a little bit on this in her webinar as well, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit more again. I seem to sometimes get the impression that, like, the whole the domestic violence world and the housing world working together is like a new thing and a new fad, when that's not really the case. Maria's been doing this kind of work in Western Pennsylvania for a while. They might be a little bit ahead of us. We've also had like advocacy within housing, such as VAWA, so the Violence Against Women's Act. HUD has adopted this act and follows this rule as well. So it's HUD's VAWA final rule. So this is protecting the rights of a survivor. So it's basically stating that all individuals have the right to a home without fear of violence. It's making sure that somebody is not going to be evicted for their status as a survivor, that they're not going to be discriminated against for their status as a survivor. You know, general protection. So if the police are getting called to the unit because there's an altercation due to domestic violence, you know, we're hopefully making sure that they're not going to be evicted due to that. The housing, and then just to reiterate that the housing programs administered by HUD are now required to follow VAWA 2013 regulations. They were effective December 2016. And this rule applies for anybody that went under a COC NOFA application. So if you're like us, we're receiving COC and ESG funding, so we have to make sure that we're complying with the regulations of VAWA, just as any other agency that would be receiving that funding stream as well. I don't think, did we talk about what the mission is for the continuum of care, Erica? Did you and Chris already say that?
I didn't talk about it. I don't think Chris did either.
Okay. So I also just wanted to highlight, and in case anybody in the room doesn't know, what the Eastern Pennsylvania Continuum of Care is. So their mission is to end homelessness in all 33 counties, so the 33 county region area for the Eastern PA COC. It's a comprehensive housing crisis response system that includes coordinated entry, homeless prevention, street outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. Coordinated entry will ensure limited housing and resources will be prioritized for the people who need them the most, while generating the accurate data to make the case for appropriate levels of investment in the future. So I know Chris said earlier that she can essentially go in at any point of time and get data and say, okay, there's 87 domestic violence individuals on the queue today, as of today or right now. So it is great in that aspect that we can get like immediate data, and it's going to show anybody that has called in today into the access site and has been added to the system. So it's really kind of also reinforcing for us, like, we do need to be involved because domestic violence individuals are facing homelessness. They are part of the population that we're all serving, I believe. I don't think it's just DV providers that are serving this population, even if it's, you know, not how they initially identify themselves. The core components of coordinated entry are access, assessment, prioritization, and referral. So the biggest thing I want to stress is, number one, if you're a DV provider and you're not doing paper VI SPDADs, make sure that you're minimum referring your clients to call 211. So that's going to be their immediate point of access. So they're going to get the same assessment over the phone that I might be doing with our consumers in person one-to-one. It's probably not going to be as you know, client-centered, trauma-informed. They might not be taking as much time to kind of dive into topics around their victimization or, you know, things that are really coming up as far as flashbacks or trauma, but they're going to at least get them on a system so that providers can reach out to them for housing. If anybody in the room is not doing paper VI SPDADs as far as a DV provider but wants to, Maria Williams and myself would be happy to meet with you. We have, again, Transitions is already doing this, and I'm not going to say that our model is necessarily perfect, but I'm sure that we can kind of get you on a good starting point, and you can modify things as needed. So, yes.
Well, at the meeting at Smoking Dam, we talked about having a regional training, I don't know if we said regional, but a training for advocates. Is that still going to happen, or you prefer to just do them individually?
So Maria and I were just talking about the fact that we're going to be scheduling another DV coordinated entry committee meeting, so a follow-up to the initial training that we did. And I mean, I'm honestly open to doing, you know, either way, whatever works for providers.
I just didn't know if there was something in the works because that had come up at that meeting. It just wasn't sure.
Do you feel like
if I can interject, I think that, Gina, you're talking about doing a VI SPDAT training for advocates, yeah.
So we talked about several different trainings, but that's.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So I think that the VI SPDAT is a mystery for everyone that doesn't work at an access site. And I think it's really important just to like level set about that. And Org Code offers a really great online training. Org Code is a website. Well, then they're not a website. They're an organization that has a website that has a great training on it. One of the things though that we had talked about is getting DV advocates together, folks that work in DV programs, to talk about the VI SPDAT and how it's never been tested for survivors. And so part of the reason that there's the interest in doing the VI SPDAT in paper by domestic violence agencies is that we actually don't know if the VI SPDAT works for survivors to get the score that a survivor needs to move through the system. So this isn't like special treatment for survivors, it's actually making sure that like there's some sort of equal playing field, just to clarify. So I think that we should get together and talk about the VI SPDAT and do a brief overview of it. And if other folks other than DV providers want to come, I think that would be lovely too. But I think that there's been a real gap in understanding about what this assessment is and what a vulnerability indexing score even is and how that works. And it's important to have more clarity around that. The other thing that you can always do with your clients, regardless of whether or not they are survivors or not, is if they haven't had an assessment, you can call with them. If they want you in the room or if they want your support in that, you can be on the phone too. because it can be an intimidating process. And I know when I don't want to do something, I will do everything in the world to avoid it. And if I've just gotten into shelter and I'm finally feeling comfortable for the first time in a million years, and then this person that I don't even know says to me, you need to call 211 and talk to people, more people you don't know, about all the trauma you've experienced, I'd be like, no, thank you. I'm fine here until somebody tells me otherwise. A really great way to make sure that your clients are accessing to get onto coordinated entry is to offer to make that call with them and sit with them in that space, talk them through the answers, and if you have more context for what the VI SPDAT is, that's going to be even easier for you to do.
Thanks, Marie.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? Mostly, more or less? Yeah, we can also touch base that.
No, I mean, I know we're oriented, but we are gonna do the paper-based, but I do know that part. We don't know how to do it. So that's, I feel like there is some importance, especially in that we don't know how to actually use this instrument to get people to score this.
Have an effective score rate.
Yeah, so.
But you
That's kind
know
of
that you should be seeing based off of, you know.
Yeah, but like based off what we do.
Or doing,
Yeah, exactly. So, thank you.
So I want to briefly kind of talk about what's happening when somebody is calling in to coordinated entry. So when I meet with an individual one-to-one, I'm getting their permission to then put that assessment into the community queue on HMIS. You know, they are aware that other providers are going to be seeing that information, that they're going to be searching for housing. So we do a VI SPDAT informed consent at transitions and then follow up with appropriate consent to release forms as needed. So if we're putting them on the system and transitions isn't initially engaging them, we just have placed them on the community queue for other providers to pick them up for services. So again, we need to make sure that it's listed on there that yes, they're residing in transitions, but we're not engaging with them. They still need to be served by another provider. So making sure those notes are updated. We also need to make sure that we're getting those consent to releases then. So following our standards that we already have in place as a DV provider. So if I know that Stacy's gonna be picking my client up because she's called me and said, Kayla, I'm looking at HMIS number 25412. Are you working with them for rapid? And I'm gonna say, nope, they're in our shelter currently, but still looking for housing. Do you have space to pick them up? Stacy tells me yes. I'm gonna meet with that client and get a consent to release information signed at that point. And then at that point, I'll be talking with Stacy about that client specific information, sharing the name, sharing you know, whatever they give me permission to share at that point as far as their needs, saying this is who you're gonna be meeting with to do an intake for.
Can I add something, Kim?
Yeah.
In the past, PCAUB has said that information should not be shared, and that was wrong. And we have spent the last year backtracking on that statement. So if you have a signed agreement with coordinated entry, and you have releases signed with the survivor you're working with to share information, that information can be shared when you're on BNL calls. If you know the status of your survivor and the survivor has said you can share my status, then you can share that status on the call. You of course don't want to give any details that are identifiable, but that's just like our practice, right? Like that's just what we do. And if you're working in general homelessness work too, you also don't want to give a bunch of identifying factors about somebody's life. So if you're just using that standard of like confidentiality and sort of consciousness around it, it is absolutely fine to share that information, and PCADB was wrong. So
I want to a little bit talk about what's happening. So if a survivor calls into 211, just a little bit briefly touch on that because not all the survivors that transitioned was even serving are coming out of our safe house. So we might be on a call with Chris and she says, Kayla, this HMIS number, nobody's been able to engage with. Can you see if you can reach out and potentially serve them for rapid? So they are being identified on the system from calling in. When they call into 211, they're physically dialing in, calling into the number. They're gonna go through triage and safety planning questions initially to start. So they're gonna ask, are you currently living with or trying to leave an intimate partner you're afraid of or who threatens you? So that's question number 1 to alert them for DV or safety concerns. And then the second question is, do you feel safe where you're currently staying? So a 211 call specialist was asking them this over the phone. And at that point, if they're kind of immediately open to sharing the fact that, yes, maybe they had to leave because, I'm pregnant, he escalated when he found out that I was pregnant, and maybe kicked me out of the house or something like that, or attacked me. I had to, go to my mom's house or my sister's house to get away for safety reasons. Maybe they're going to open up and share those details. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just going to answer yes to those questions. And at that point, they're going to offer to do a DV anonymous assessment with them. So then at that point, what a provider is seeing on the system is simply that they're a DV anonymous consumer, their HMIS number, and a way to contact them. So what I want to talk about next is really what I'm hoping to see as far as like notes within the system and documentation for DV consumers, because just the very limited time I've been in this position, I'm seeing just a lot of concerns with reaching out to a DV anonymous consumer. So a mainstream provider, maybe they're not feeling super assured about reaching out because they have no information. All they have is, simply that it's a DV person and that this is their contact information and maybe, only call me after 3:30 or something like that. So I just want to talk a little bit about the fact that I want to encourage everybody that when they're making those calls, so if you're doing your 3 attempts in 5 days to try and contact this person, they're the next highest scoring on the list. So you're making those contacts. Ideally, we should try to be doing safety planning, whenever you're having a phone call with somebody that's a DV anonymous consumer. I really want to get to the point that these notes are already entered from 211, but that at this point it's not happening yet. So I'm going to encourage you all to start doing it yourselves. So if you happen to contact somebody that's a DV consumer, be asking those questions. I handed out another handout as well, has a little phone on it, and it's like a brief conversation. So ideally in my head, I'm envisioning from a DV provider's perspective that you're calling this person. So this is best case scenario, of course, not that ever happens or anything, yeah. You're calling this person, they're answering. So I don't have a name to ask for. This person answers, so I don't know their name. And they say hello to me. I'm going to introduce myself and say, hi, my name is Kayla. I'm calling to see if you or anyone in your household may be in need of housing assistance. Is this a good time to talk? And at that point, I'm going to be trying to get a yes or a no from them, because if they're in a situation where somebody is present and they can't talk, they're just going to say, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now, and hang up on me. Because I'm starting to, I'm getting a sense from a lot of people that they're maybe concerned about calling, because what if they're still in a situation where they're residing with the abuser or something like that? Continue to kind of talk to them. So if they're saying yes, that they need housing, you're then gonna say, I see that you either called into 211 to gain access, Chris is yelling at me because I'm running out of time, or they went into an access site to get onto the system. So, giving them their password at that point, I say, I see that you listed this as your password. I know that you may be in a situation where you're having safety concerns. Again, is now an okay time to talk. And then before you really talk about setting up an intake or anything related to housing, get those safety questions out of the way. Is this a good phone number to use? Is it safe to leave a voicemail? Safe to identify where I'm calling from? Is there any alerts that I need to make other providers aware of? So is there a period that they should not be calling you? Does anybody else have access to this phone? Is anybody else going to answer this phone? So those should be like the initial things that you're determining when you're making a call. And then at that point, as Erica and Chris talked about earlier, like really determine, are they a good candidate for your program as a provider? Are they able to get to you based on transportation? What's their income like? So you're trying to determine if they meet your specific requirements for your program. So, I'm not sure what Stacy has as far as things that consumers have to meet when she's calling them. Maybe you have an income guideline or something like that that you need to identify. I want to encourage everybody to do just like very generic notes when they're adding them in. So consumer informed me that they're residing, in temporary shelter. They're still looking for housing. Again, the notes about the safety. Consumer informed me that they're getting, $700 in SSI a month. So that some of those questions that providers might need for enrollment are answered in there without giving any identifying information. So again, I just refrain from disclosing things like gender, so use the phrase consumer instead of like he, she pronouns. You're not going to put anybody's name in the system. Not going to put kids' names in the system, addresses. Refrain from giving any personal opinions or judgments about the situation. So even if you are thinking this person is not meeting what you have in mind as like a DV consumer, it's probably not appropriate to put things like if somebody is exiting shelter that they're returning to abuser. Marie and I have kind of talked about this a little bit, and we want to say things more like return to previous household or return to previous residence, just because saying that somebody's going back to their abuser, hopefully not that a mainstream provider might see that and think, okay, they're not maybe as deserving of housing as somebody else. Refrain from using statements that could be victim blaming or seen as not validating the victim's experience. And I also just want to really encourage everybody to realize that not everyone you're calling as a DV anonymous consumer is going to be a woman or identifying as a woman. Survivors can come in many different forms. So, you need to call them in anticipation that, you may hear a male voice or someone that sounds like male on the other end of the line, and you still need to be prepared to have a conversation with them about what their current needs are for housing. Anybody have questions on all of that before we do the last thing? This is kind of my last hoorah, the emergency transfer plan, which again, I know Maria talked about in her DV best practices training, so this was already touched on. Basically, the emergency transfer plan is going to be for an individual that is housed in a rapid rehousing program, but their abuser maybe has now located where they're staying, maybe they're showing up and disrupting the property, making threats, they're attacking them. If they're coming to you and saying that they're feeling unsafe down in that unit, we need to be looking at solutions to resolve that. So that could look like an intertransfer, so like within your same agency, if you have additional units or another landlord in a different area that could house them maybe, and you could kind of easily put them over into another unit. As long as they're fine with being in that area, great. If it's a situation where they need to go outside of your county or get a little further away to maintain safety, then you can submit an emergency transfer. It's gonna go to your regional manager, so it can either be filled out, the request can either be filled out by the consumer or a representative, so like Jean could help someone fill it out as an advocate if they gave permission. We're asking that those get sent to the regional managers, and then we're gonna be in communication, myself, so if it was going through South Central, Eric and I would be in conversation about what our next steps need to be, and we would be alerting everybody that is reviewing consumers on the queue that this person needs to be a priority, and we wanna try and get them turned around ideally in 10 days to be rehoused. Or questions on that? It's not necessarily going to look different on the queue for that person. It's probably more so just going to be advocacy between like the regional managers and providers to really have conversations and make sure that that person gets relocated.
I mean, it's probably just a detail, but it's in my brain because of what I do. If, does the status of an emergency transfer plan change at all if the survivor just had to leave that residence for their immediate safety, so they came into shelter? You know, they didn't get rid of the lease. They just for like, I don't know, for the next 5 nights, I need to stay in shelter because it is not safe for me to be there. Do you know what I'm saying? Because ideally, in everything I'm hearing,
so Maria
should be updated to say that this person's now in emergency shelter, even though they're still maintaining this lease and this place is not safe.
Right, so like let's say that they came into Hutchinson House and,
because I really can't stay there. I know I've got probably maybe 10 days, I'm gonna have a new place, but I can't stay here for 10 days. But we haven't broken the lease yet or anything like that, so I don't know, I've thrown a bunch of stuff out there, I'm just curious.
I mean, Maria can tell me if she has a different thought, but I think if it was a situation where they felt that they needed to come into shelter and you have space, yeah, of course we want you to take them. I don't think that that's necessarily going to jeopardize their chance at getting an emergency transfer.
No, in fact, it will probably help, because there'll be somebody that's working with them all the time, because they're in shelter. So, a survivor's status of where they're living doesn't impact their category 4 standing, which is where the emergency transfer falls.
Okay.
Yeah, we would just have to make sure that we're not getting lazy because we're thinking, oh, we have 30 days now to spend in shelter.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
We would all still have to make sure that we're communicating and doing what we need to find another unit.
Thank you.
I don't know, guys, did anybody see Chris coming?
Yes, everything's here.
Is it here? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna announce that we're gonna take a break.
For everybody that's watching on Skype, we're gonna adjourn for lunch and then we'll be back at, I don't know, because I
I'd
messed the
say
schedule.
probably like 1 o'clock? I don't know, it's 12:20 now.
Okay. 1 o'clock-ish.
Yeah, 1 o'clock. So we are gonna turn off the video while we are
Okay.
at lunch.
So we'll be back at 1, everybody online.
So that we can still have time for case conferencing. But one of the things that I want to talk about is administering the VI SPDAT and understanding the VI SPDAT. Because who here has never actually seen the VI SPDAT in its entirety? Oh, good. So we're just going to go through the individual VSPDAT and talk about the questions and see what things mean and what things are. I'm actually going to park myself because I feel like I'm in people's way. You guys can see now. Okay, cool. Ah! Run. Okay, so this is what the VSPAT looks like. And when somebody calls into 211 or goes to an access site, they're going to be assessed. Now, if you're doing a DV assessment, it looks a little different because all of the identifying information is just gone. Those lines aren't even there. It's not even an option to collect that information. So this is a non-DV assessment. And there is a script that the call center follows, but as access sites and as DV providers who might be administering the VI-SPDAT, like Transitions does and like DVSCP does, it's important to understand that the VSPDAT it needs to be a conversation that we have with people. It can't just be a sort of rote telemarketer kind of interview. People need to understand the ins and outs and the whys behind things. And you may, as a case manager, have to to sit with a client as a VSPDAT is administered. So from a case management perspective as well, to understand the ins and outs behind these questions will help you, help your clients have a correct assessment. Because sometimes we find that, you know, this is a person who's known to the system, and we know that they are high risk, or we know that they are multiple subpopulations, but they're scoring a 3. And there's no possible way that they should be scoring a 3. And a lot of the time we find out it's because they didn't understand the question that was asked of them. So as providers, it needs to be a conversation. So we're reading.
And that could be, I thought of that too.
And if they don't understand, if something in their body language is either saying that they don't understand, or that they're withholding something, or something's just off, we need to be responding in ways that are trauma-informed, active listening, and sort of helping people understand the assessment better. It is permissible for people's case managers to sit in with them while they have the VSPDAT administered. That is happening at Transitions, it's happening at DVSCP, and it's often happening when people are calling in 211 from places like they might walk into the HAP office here in town. The HAP office is not an access site. They're not the people that administer the VSPDAT, but those case managers will sit with their people on the phone with 211 and help them through the process. This is especially important for people who are in crisis, because people in crisis, we know, don't think as clearly as people who are not in crisis. There also may be IBD issues happening. There may be trauma issues happening, not just emotional, but you know, we see a lot of head injuries with people fleeing DV. They might not. They might have a concussion. They might have. Other people might have mental health issues and might not understand the questions. So anything we can do to help people be assessed correctly and thoroughly and accurately will be very helpful. You know, the first thing we do, we take basic information, again, not if it's a DV person. First name, last name, nicknames. You know, if you've got, you know, a guy whose name is James Earl Jones, but he goes by Chewy, we want to know because, you know, we talk to providers and people are going to say, who's James Earl? Oh, you mean Chewy? Yeah. What language do you feel best able to express yourself? Date of birth, age, social security number, and the consent to participate is really important. In the opening script, it's people administering the VSPDAT make sure that people understand this is a unified record. Like, being assessed will mean that you agree to having your information shared with multiple providers, and that multiple providers will be able to access your file and reach out to you. And they could, the first point they could score is if they are older than 60. And the HMIS system will score people automatically. You don't have to do that math yourself. The DV providers relay it to me, and that I will do the math for them. So even they don't have to do the math themselves, which is great. So then we talk about their history of housing and homelessness. We ask, where do you sleep most frequently? And that's important, because we're getting back to that every once in a while. They put themselves in a hotel. Where do you sleep most frequently? Well, most frequently I'm on the bench on the square. Every once in a while I go to a hotel, but I'm usually on that bench. So the frequently is the answer. And then we're going to, I feel like if I stand over here, maybe it won't be in the way. And then we're going to ask, how long has it been since you've lived in permanent stable housing? And we've got years and months, right? And this gets dicey, especially with people fleeing domestic violence, because they may have been in their own home. They may have a house that they've owned for 30 years. But if they've been actively trying to get away for 3, it has not been permanent stable, because they leave and come back and leave and come back, right? So that's important for you to suss out, especially as DV providers. You know, how long has it been unstable? And in the last 3 years, how many times have you been homeless? So again, you know, leave and come back, leave and come back. Or, you know, maybe I was in rapid rehousing, but then I lost my job. So we're looking in the last 3 years. And that is actually where the DV assessment starts, is on that question of how long has it been since you've been in permanent stable. All of that other stuff, not a thing.
Chris, I have a question.
Yes.
So how is that answered then? If somebody has had a desire to leave their home for 3 years, say, but have never had the opportunity, never had the courage.
That is up to it. Then that is, if they have said my home has been unstable for 3 years, then we take them at their word for that.
So I think that how that question is asked then is really, really key. It might explain some of the low scores that we see with survivors.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So especially with DV, that's a conversation that needs to be had. Because we allow people to self-identify and self-report. So if they're saying, my home has been unstable for 3 years, then we take them at that word. So yes.
And sometimes they moved in with the abuser, and then the abuse started right away.
Correct.
So that it's not considered permanent stable.
Correct. Right. So that's really case by case, up to the person, up to the survivor to make that determination. We want to give people that agency. And then we talk about their risks. Now we're going to go, this is, because we just asked a question about 3 years. Now we're flipping time to 6 months. So what I like to do is remind people, 6 months ago, that would be, late summer. Give them a point in time reference, because 6 months, it's hard sometimes to think back so far. We think back, it's January, so December, November, October, September, August. So like right around Labor Day, give them a point in time reference, or let's say the 1st of August, like late summer. How many times have you received health care at an emergency room? And people are weird about that question, because they think, oh, well, they didn't admit me, so it doesn't count. No, if you turned up at the emergency room, it counts, right? How many times have you taken an ambulance to the hospital? And people will look at me strange with that too, like, okay, out of the 6 times that Sonia went to the emergency room, how many of those times did you take an ambulance, right? And then how many times have you been hospitalized as an inpatient? And again, using that, Sonia went to the emergency room 6 times, how many of those times did they keep you, right? D is utilized a crisis service, including sexual assault crisis, mental health crisis, family intimate violence, distress centers, and suicide prevention hotlines. A lot of the times people don't understand that when they are sitting in front of you as a domestic violence provider, that counts as one, right? That's one. So if you have somebody who is at a safe house or at a DV provider's doorstep, that's an automatic one. Anything else, you're gonna have that conversation of, well, how many times have you done this before? But sometimes people, I'm noticing, will answer that question 0 when they're literally sitting in a case manager's office at a safe house. So that's always going to be at least a 1 for anybody who is utilizing a domestic violence service. Yes.
Can I ask a question? So these questions are pertaining to whomever is on this household?
Yeah, anybody in the household, not just head of household, anybody in the household. The next one is, have you had to talk to police because you witnessed a crime, were the victim of a crime, the alleged perpetrator of a crime, or because the police told you must move along? Another way that people get tripped up by this question, well, they never told me to move along, but they always seem to go after me because I'm homeless, right? So another way you can sort of help clarify that is, have you been harassed by the police for being homeless? That they seem to understand that phraseology sometimes more than being told to move along. And then the last one is, stayed 1 or more nights in a holding cell, jail, or prison, whether it was a short-term stay like the drunk tank, a longer stay for a more serious offense, or anything in between. That's pretty self-explanatory. Have you had to spend the night in jail? And if you score 4 or more on any of those questions, if your total adds up to 4 or more, you do get a point. Have you been attacked or beaten up since you've become homeless? Yes or no? And one of the things we're seeing DV survivors trip up on is saying, no, I haven't been attacked or beaten up. Sitting there with bruises all over your face. Yeah, probably. Physical abuse counts as that. If they have been in an unstable situation and they are being physically abused, that counts. So a lot of times they won't classify that as, oh, I didn't get mugged, so it doesn't count. But yes, it actually does. Have you threatened or tried to harm yourself or anyone else in this past year? This is a way of gently asking about suicidal thoughts and actions, because those are other referrals that can be made as well. Because we're not just assessing to give them a score, we're assessing them holistically to see what services they need, right? And if you come across someone who answers this question, yes, that might be a side conversation that as a case manager you can have with them about how they're feeling now and do you need resources. So they would get, if they answered yes to either of those, they would get a point. There we go. The next thing we're going to talk about is legal issues. Do you have any legal stuff going on right now that might result in you being locked up, having to pay fines, or that might make it more difficult to rent a place to live? That is not just warrants. That could be evictions. That could be a PFA. That could be any sort of legal stuff that could be a barrier. And that barrier doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, nobody's going to rent to me. It could be, this is occupying so much space in my mind right now that that becomes, the fact that it's occupying all the space in the mind becomes then a barrier to getting housing. Because if that is taking 90% of your brain energy, you're not going to have a lot left for anything else, right? Does anybody try to force or trick you into doing things that you don't want to do? Everybody wants to answer that question no, because everybody wants to, think that they're independent and resilient. This is not just a way to find out if someone is weak-willed. This is also a check for human trafficking. It is also a check for emotional abuse and manipulation and gaslighting, right? This is especially important for people who are experiencing domestic violence, because people don't realize that emotional abuse is abuse. People don't realize that manipulation and gaslighting is a form of control, and that makes people vulnerable to it from other directions. Once it's gotten in from one angle, it can occupy a lot of space in your brain and make you vulnerable. Do you ever do things that may be considered to be risky, like exchanging sex for money, running drugs for someone, have unprotected sex with someone you don't know, share needles or anything like that? A lot of times people will refuse to answer this question. It's important to remind people that this is a no judgment assessment. We're not judging. We're not going to turn you in. We just need a clear picture, right? And again, there are some resources that are out there for people who are struggling with opioid addiction. There are resources out there for people who need help. And again, it's an opportunity for a side conversation at a case management level on a later basis. These VSPID acts are great. They're not only good for getting people onto the housing list, it's a great ground zero to start for case management as well, to know what people need to work on, to know what people are struggling with. And the more of a neutral, non-threatening, accepting environment that we can have when we're administering these assessments, the better, clearer picture of a person we're going to have, and the more we're going to be able to help them on a lot of levels. The next thing we're going to talk about is socialization and daily functioning. Is there any person, past landlord, business, bookie, dealer, or any government group like the IRS that thinks you owe them money? That's important, the way that's worded. Thinks you owe them money. Any kind of debt. Because sometimes they might not actually owe that money, right? Sometimes it might be a family member put something in their name and it's not actually their fault. Or, there are just lots of things that would make people say, I don't want to answer that question, right? But again, having a clearer picture of a person. So this could be fines, it could be evictions, it could be back rent to a landlord, it could be credit card debt, it could be student loans, it could be anything. So what we found is a lot of people are saying, well, I didn't think that counted. It probably counts. If it's debt, it probably counts. And again, it's self-reported. People are allowed to, if they say, yes, this is a thing, then it's a thing. We take that at face value. Do you get any money from the government, a pension, an inheritance, working under the table, a regular job, or anything like that? Basically, do you have an income of any kind? Food stamps do not count, right? Because you can only buy food with those. If people don't count child support, that's fine, because child support's not always real consistent, right? It's not always going to be there. Socialization and daily functioning, we're really looking, again, at a person holistically. So, do you have planned activities other than just surviving that make you feel happy and fulfilled? Planned activities. Do you go to church? Do you go to a support group? Do you, go to coffee with a buddy once a week? Do you have anything in your life routine that makes you feel happy and fulfilled? Like I have routines that I do. I play bar trivia with my buddies on Monday nights. It's what I do. And it makes me feel happy and fulfilled. It could be anything like that, but it can't just be, I read books, right? Could it be, yes, 3 mornings a week, I go jogging. That's an activity, right? This seems like a frivolous question, but it's not. Because if your every waking moment is focused on survival, then your world becomes very small. And if your survival starts to get rocky, then do you have other people in your community that you can call? And this could actually open up a prevention conversation. This could open up a conversation about support systems, and how people have a community around them. So do we need to work on building a foundation in the community for this person as well? Are you currently able to take care of basic needs like bathing, changing clothes, using restroom, getting food and clean water, and other things like that? That's pretty self-explanatory. Can you take care of the basics, or are you, drinking from a stream and using a hole in the woods as your latrine? The next one is important. It's another, if somebody doesn't disclose at the beginning of the VSPDAT that they are experiencing domestic violence, this is another opportunity for them to disclose, right? Is your current homelessness in any way caused by a relationship that broke down, an unhealthy or abusive relationship, or because family or friends caused you to become evicted? If they answer yes to that, that needs to pause the assessment, and a side conversation needs to be had. Because if it turns out that they are experiencing domestic violence, and they've just now started to feel comfortable enough with you to disclose that, we want to give them the option again of, are you sure you don't want an anonymous assessment, right? We want to give them every opportunity to assess DV services. Do you want to talk to a hotline? Do you want, it's because sometimes, she doesn't know me from Adam, and at the beginning of the assessment, she's not comfortable enough to tell me that she's being abused and that she's fleeing. But halfway through, after we've had these conversations and we've created that environment of acceptance and trust, maybe she is.
Wow. But I wanted to print a picture and put it in here and give this to you. But that you're gonna print it won't work.
Next thing we're going to talk about is wellness. Have you ever had to leave an apartment, shelter program, or other place you're staying because of your physical health? This is one that's tripping up people who have experienced DV. It is not just my apartment was full of black mold and I had to leave. My kid was chewing on the windowsills full of lead paint and I had to leave. Physical health could be my husband was beating me up so I had to leave. Right? My husband was beating my kids, so I had to leave. My wife was throwing things at our children. We had to leave to keep us physically safe. Do you have any chronic health issues? This one trips everybody up. Because it mentions certain organs, people think that it only means those organs. They are just examples. Do you have any chronic health issues with your liver, kidneys, stomach, lungs, or heart? Chronic health issues can involve any organ or limb or body part. Chronic health issues. Could be asthma, could be IBS, could be, diabetic ulcers on your feet. It could be anything chronic. That trips a lot of people up.
Could they rephrase that question?
Right now, we do not have the ability.
Right on there.
Right, we do not have the ability to change the VSPDAT because it is copyrighted, but a side conversation can happen to clarify the question. The next question, if there was space available in a program that specifically assists people that live with HIV or AIDS, would that be of interest to you? I love the way that question is worded. It is probably the gentlest way to ask somebody's HIV status without being real blunt about it. Because there are programs that will help people. Very few, but there are 2 in our COC that will help people who live with AIDS. Do you have any physical disabilities that would limit the type of housing you could access or would make it hard to live independently because you need help? We don't want to put a, paralyzed stroke victim on a 3rd floor walk-up. That would just be dumb, right? We don't want to put people into housing that's going to be inaccessible to them. It's also worth a side conversation about 811 housing. the Center for Independent Living and Self-Determination Housing Project has a housing wait list called 811 Housing that people who are eligible for waiver services can get subsidies through the SIL or through SDHP. And each county has a local liaison lead that is able to put people on the wait list for that. And right now the wait list is not huge in this area. So, and when I say this area, I mean like this COC kind of area. So that's worth a side conversation. If you have someone who, you know, has cerebral palsy or is a double amputee or has some sort of challenge that would make them eligible for waiver services, that might be a worthy side conversation to have as case manager. And that could open up that discussion. When you're sick or not feeling well, do you avoid getting help? White coat syndrome. Do you go to the doctor? I know that I would answer that question. Yup. I don't like going to the doctor. And that's a whole conversation about physical health that you could start opening people up. Like, do you need to get insurance? Is that why you avoid going? Is because of money? And then for female respondents only, are you currently pregnant? And frankly, I would ask everyone because gender is not always matching up to anatomy. And non-binary folks and trans men can be pregnant. So just ask the question and don't assume that, you know, only female presenting people have uteruses. Then we're going to talk about substance abuse. Has your drinking or drug use led you to being kicked out of an apartment or program where you're staying in the past? So we talk about the past and the present and the future in two different questions. So that is in the past, and you can remind people that the past is the past, and we're not judging you for that. You know, maybe 20 years ago you did have an addiction issue, and you haven't had an addiction issue, but in the past it was a problem, which is why the next question is, will drinking or drug use make it difficult for you to stay housed or afford your housing? And if the answer to that is yes, that's okay, because sometimes harm reduction is a thing. And if, yeah, I'm gonna drink a case of beer a day or a case of beer every couple of days. Maybe as a case manager, we can say, okay, we're gonna build that into your budget so that you can drink and stay housed, because it doesn't have to be either or. Harm reduction, it's a thing. And this is a place to start with that conversation with your case management. Have you ever had trouble maintaining your housing or been kicked out of an apartment shelter program or other place you were staying because of a mental health issue or concern? That doesn't have to be, you know, I punched holes in the walls because I have anger issues. That could be, I had terrible depression and stopped opening my mail and didn't pay my rent because I was too depressed to figure that out. Or maybe somebody had unchecked schizophrenia or some other mental health challenge that caused them to believe they weren't safe in their apartment. That's all okay. So we just need to know so that we can see if, you know, maybe permanent supportive housing is more appropriate than rapid for you. And that all plays into the scoring. A past head injury. Have you lost your housing because of a head injury? Again, with people who are fleeing domestic violence, we're seeing a lot of head injuries. And Sonia, do you want to speak to that for a second? Because you and I have had this discussion.
Well, I mean, we have to do an assessment, which is called a health tool. So that's helpful in finding out whether there may be a traumatic brain injury if they support. Yes, if one of these two of those items on the assessment, then we do encourage them to talk to a doctor. So, you know, you can even go back to that and say, well, when we did the health tool, you know, we talked about traumatic brain injury, and so, you know, it makes them a little easier. People don't like to admit things even when they're, you know.
Sure, it's hard to admit things, and maybe a person did leave because of physical abuse, and the physical abuse included, he gave me a concussion, and that was my wake-up call. So yeah, I left my housing after I got a concussion from my abuser. A learning disability, developmental disability, or other impairment. We're noticing that as well. We had a young man who ended up on the queue because he had Down syndrome and had always lived with his parents. His parents both died. He had no idea that he had to pay his property taxes and his mortgage. So his IDD, his Down syndrome, directly contributed to him losing his housing. Do you have any mental health or brain issues that would make it hard for you to live independently because you need help? Pretty self-explanatory, and again, opens a discussion about, levels of case management needed. So they would get a score for mental health, and then the system, if you have a physical health issue, a mental health issue, and a substance abuse issue, it's called trimorbidity, and you get an extra point for that. Because having all three of those challenges together makes you, extra vulnerable. So you do get an extra point for that. Come on. Think. Okay. Are there any medications that a doctor said that you should be taking for whatever reason that you are not taking? And a lot of people just think that that's, like mental health off your meds. No, that could be, I'm rationing my insulin. I can't afford my medication. My doctor said I should be taking my heart pills twice a day, and I'm only taking them once a day because I can't afford them. So that's a whole conversation about health. Not just, I'm not taking my meds, period. Yes.
What about more like optional medication, like birth control, that type of?
Birth controls,
that's prescribed by a doctor, but
that's up to the person to disclose. That I'm not going to put any restrictions on that. Are there any medications like painkillers that you don't take the way the doctor prescribed, or where you sell the medicine? Again, this is not just the opioid question. This is, are you selling your Lancets? Are you selling your test strips? Are you, rationing your medication? And that's a whole other conversation that you can have with your people. And then the last question is one last chance to help people who might not have yet disclosed that they are experiencing domestic violence. And we remind people, this is a yes or no question. You don't have to get into it. We don't need details. But yes or no, has your current period of homelessness been caused by an experience of emotional, physical, psychological, sexual, or other type of abuse, or by any other trauma you may have experienced? We want to give people one last opportunity if they need domestic violence services to get that help. We don't want to finish without one more chance because we're real serious about it, and we're very serious about anonymity as well. So that's the VSPDAT. There are some follow-up questions. Where is it easiest to find you? Do you have a phone number? Do you have an email? Are you working with case manager, etc.? But that is the VSPDAT in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions about it?
So
yeah.
At any point in the middle, if they decide that it needs to be a DV one, do you just go up to the other one, it'll transfer all the information?
You'll have to start over again on an anonymous, but you hit cancel. Cancel the workflow, it will go away.
Okay.
And you just go back and hit that DV button and start over. So we do that purposefully so that nothing accidentally gets transferred over. So even on that last question, if all of a sudden they break down and decide, I really am fleeing, and they want to change, just reassure them that's completely okay. Cancel the workflow, go back through, hit that gold button, and at that point you will have already had a long conversation with them, so it won't take that long. We can just basically go through the answers again and click through what you need to.
What do you find in the average length of time to accomplish one?
It could be any. I've administered a lot of these VSPDATs, and I've had as little as 8 minutes and up to an hour, depending on how chatty people need to be.
Because I know when we first started in Access that they're trying to keep us to a certain.
Right.
Time.
It depends, and your people who are running the access sites and having these conversations, it's important, like if they're not, if they're just doing the assessment, to know when to let people go a little bit and share, and when to say, okay, I'm really sorry, but we have to keep moving. When it comes to domestic violence and administering the BSPDAT in a safe house setting, it might take several sessions with a person to get through the BSPDAT because it might just be too traumatic, and that is perfectly okay. Even, I just had one that it took me 35 days to get one person in the system because her mental health was so bad that I could ask her one question at a time. Any more than that, and she would snap out at me. It took me 35 days to get her into the system, but we finally did it because I did one question a day and basically bribed her with coffee. But you do what it takes, right? You two know exactly what it is. And that one helped me get her. But you do what it takes, right? It doesn't all have to be done in one setting, especially when it comes to being really trauma informed. The bottom line is the BSPDAT is a phenomenal tool, not just for assessment for coordinated entry, but also as a diving board for case management. But it needs to be administered in a way that is trauma informed and gentle and conversational. Any questions? Great, next.
It is a 1:45. Do you want to do the case conferencing? And we can skip through my part.
We'll just do some. So we're going to skip the next section and go straight to case conferencing. Did anybody bring any questions, cases, hard problems that you want some help dealing with?
And the section that we are skipping will be in the PowerPoint.
It will be in the PowerPoint. It is just about pulling appropriately.
Yeah, and it came all directly from the written standards.
It's just the written standards, and there's only one agency here. I think there's two agencies here that are pulling, and they're pulling appropriately, so it's fine. Does anybody have any general questions, case questions? I'm not gonna fall. Case questions, scenarios that you want a relocation. We want to break down the barriers and say you don't have to stay in the same county that you're from. And it's great. However, while the 33 counties are open to everyone, I think that if somebody says, I'm willing to go to all 33 counties, before you just list the other counties, you need to have a discussion with them. You know, if you go to these other counties, you need to, like, how are you going to get there? Agencies do not have transportation to get people places. Are you going to be able to get there? And helping people understand that if you go to a different county, you know, how are you going to support this move? Because you're going to be in an unfamiliar place. You just need to do some planning with them of, like, what's your income source going to be? You know, if you choose to move to Mifflin County, there's no public transit. It's very rural. Like, what is your plan for getting a job up there? What is your plan for a support system as far as childcare? Like, we want to encourage people to have mobility, but be realistic about it as well. Because right now we're sending providers on wild goose chases. And it's just, it's really frustrating when, you know, somebody's calling and saying, you know, this person said they want to come here, and then the person says, no, I don't want to come here. So when you're putting people on the queue, be really cognizant of that, of, like, are you just saying you're willing to relocate, or are you actually, you know, working towards that? So that's a conversation you need to have as as you are putting people on the queue, of not just saying that and moving on. Like, it's a real conversation that needs to happen, and they need to understand what moving entails and what that's gonna look like before they commit to that. Yes, Erica?
I just want to add one other thing to that. And what I see is that like 9 times out of 10, that person really is not willing to move out of the county that they're in, or at least not out of the surrounding county.
Correct.
So even like trying, like talking to them about like maybe focusing on the zone that they're in and maybe those counties if they would be willing to move to them.
Right.
But 9 times out of 10,
And again,
they're not
and
going
if it's, and domestic violence is its own big animal too. Like, if they desperately need to be out of the area, we have a network of DV providers who are now in the room together. We're all at the table together. We can talk to each other. And we've had those conversations where people have needed to get out of the area. And we have connected, particularly transitions and DVSCP, completely different ends of the RHAB. And we've made those transitions happen when they need to. Even if it's safe house to safe house, and then figure it out once they get up there. So safety planning always first. And if the safety plan means you need to be in a safe house in a different part of the state and then figure it out, that's like safety always comes first. Yes.
I just would say too, and this just comes to mind because it's happened so many times, maybe not only relative to domestic violence, but maybe particularly, is to find out what kind of custody issues they might be dealing with their children, because they can, even if they're fleeing for safety, be found in violation of like having left the custodial restraint. I know it seems ridiculous, but it's true.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's another thing, if you're having a conversation with somebody about 33 counties, like, do you have any kind of custody agreement? What does it say? What do you know, what you, or do you have full custody? Just,
right,
I would
those are all things that need to be discussed.
But they might not even realize, oh, I can't just go.
I can't just move to Allentown, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Does that sort of help clarify things? Good. Any other questions, problems, hard cases, scenarios, hypotheticals? Yes.
I just have a question about, like being a mandated reporter and hearing from people about what's happening in their family. And is that coming up at all? So like a family that says, you know, we've been living in our car and.
Being homeless is not it's not child abuse. It is not a reportable offense.
No, I'm just wondering what else comes out when those conversations, or if things are coming out that ever rise to that level.
We have not actually had, as far as in my RHAB, we have not had an issue where we have had to call children and youth, because again, we allow people to self-report. We don't push. If somebody discloses, you know, yeah, I'm you know, living in my car, but I'm tying my kid to a tree in -30 weather while I go into work every day, it's probably a different story. But at this point, I have not seen any of that. Erica, Kayla, can you speak to that at all?
So, I mean, this kind of touches on sort of like what we talked about with the emergency transfer that we just had come up recently. I mean, I would say, like, number one, the COC doesn't have, like, their own policies on confidentiality, like, as far as, like, reporting those types of things and what, like, you are obligated to protect, and if something should happen, such as a mandated report, like an incident with a child. The COC doesn't have like their own specific policies on that. It's supposed to be organization to organization, you know, your provider where you work. So I would say like use your best judgment if something comes up and it to like in your safe house. And like Chris said, it's something outside of like a homelessness issue. that you feel like needs to be reported, I would say use your best judgment and follow your own policies and procedures that you have.
We had to, it becomes a duty to warn issue.
Yes.
We had a case recently, where someone was homicidal and had planned. So we had an obligation, but we did it outside of coordinated entry. You know, we had a case manager who was already dealing with that person, deal with that issue, because we don't want to put up, we don't want people to say, oh, don't call coordinated entry because they're gonna, you know, take my kids. They're gonna call children and youth for being homeless. No, we're not out to do that. We're out to remove barriers. However, common sense needs to prevail. So.
Yeah, I don't worry so much about when we're doing the VSPDATs, it's more assuring people that when they call, they should answer honestly.
Yes.
I'm wondering, I can think of maybe 3 or 4 families recently that maybe that's why they scored lower. It's because they didn't want to identify some of this stuff for their families because they were afraid of like, who am I talking to and what's going to be the reason?
There's nothing in the VI SPDAT that would warrant a children and youth call with a yes or no answer. A yes or no answer is a yes or no answer. There's not enough information in a yes or no answer to warrant a call.
I think it's
if they
important though, just contextually, to remember that survivors get reported to the children and youth.
Correct.
With a far disparity.
Yes.
And so survivors, it doesn't even matter if it's yes
Right.
or no answer, they're gonna be freaked out
Right.
about disclosing anything.
Right, which is why we need to foster that conversational trust approach, be trauma informed, and assure them, like, this is not, we're not here to take your children. So we're not here to heap trauma on you.
This is a dumb question, but are the folks at the access site, are they mandated reporters?
It depends on the agencies.
Yeah, okay. So their mandated reporting qualifications would go by whatever agency is housing the access site.
Right. Like, I'm a mandated reporter. That's all I'm she would be a mandated reporter.
It's depends on the program that the agency.
Right.
Yeah.
Gosh.
But again, housing issues are not,
So can I
it is so complex.
I will add, because being in the county government itself for us locally, working with Franklin County, one of the nice things is so many people do think that, oh, it's children and youth, they're bad, they're gonna take my children. One of the things I have done is I've explained, here's a resource you may wanna reach out to. Their goal is to keep you unified as one family under a roof, and their goal is to help you meet that goal. You know, so I've had some success with families that have actually reached out to the Children and Youth Department to try and actually say, hey, I need a little bit of help to get through this. But I've never had to actually turn anybody in. So that's been a good thing, yeah.
I mean, and reminding people that homelessness is not equatable to abuse.
In the same way that witnessing domestic violence is
Right.
equatable. So it's like, that's a place where I think the intersection of domestic violence and homelessness providers, we can all really support each other.
Right.
Because I know that I've had those questions run by me from folks at access sites and that are doing the VI-SPDAT. And so I think as much as you're saying homelessness isn't reportable, witnessing DV isn't reportable either.
Right.
So it's important to support each other in that. And I really like what you're saying about encouraging a family themselves to reach out, because that's a great prevention technique.
If I could just add to what Chris was saying about really listening to what the person is telling you and really hearing like what they're trying to get across. And I think most of us in this room would probably agree that sometimes the individual is like skewing all of these things to us before we're even administering this tool. So again, you need to be actively listening because maybe they mentioned to you already, that they're like, they owe PP&L $2,000 and their electric was cut off or they got a 10-day notice. So you already know the answer, to that question regarding debt and things like that. I mean, I can think of a lot of situations where it might seem very gray and like, I guess
We live
like,
in the gray.
Yeah, like
we live in the gray. There is no black and white in our field.
Right.
We live in shades of gray.
Like if a consumer is telling me like, okay, My kids have weird things with food because, my spouse and my abuser, made us like ask permission before we could eat or things like that. And then your consumer is doing things to like try and make the kids comfortable, and they're trying to work towards like rebuilding a sense of normalcy and things like that. That's not something that you need to like go and report, because mom's maybe already addressing those issues, and she's fled. She knows that she needs out of that situation. Like, she wouldn't be coming to your help otherwise. He or she would be coming to your help otherwise.
I guess for us as a dual type of thing, we take the access as the access. And then we don't utilize the information from the access, from the coordinated entry, to then just automatically translate that into program with them. But we take them now as a program person. We keep those completely separate.
It might be worth reading over as case management.
Well, because of some of what you're saying, the bias, we assess that on our own. If that makes sense.
I think
so that like we're not already being like, oh, I know this about you. Does that make sense?
You're assessing if they meet your
We do our own
guidelines
assessment from the program, which is a lot of the same information. We just do it in a less all at one time way.
Sure, but if you wanted to start there too, please feel free to use that information as well, because it would cut down on work and.
It would, but like I'm saying, I would be concerned about bias. Because you want them to be as vulnerable as possible in that assessment.
Right.
And we promise that there's nothing. And then if I take that assessment as a program person and hold you to what you said in the assessment, I can know that information, but I need to still take you from who you are when you walk through my door as a program person, client. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but it also, the point of the assessment is so that people aren't pulling people blind. And we also want to be careful not to re-traumatize people by making them tell their story over and over. The whole point of coordinated entry is so that they don't have to do that. That they don't have to be reassessed with every program.
That's why we don't, that's what I'm saying. We're an emergency shelter, so we're at a different.
Right,
we're not
but
taking them
I'm just saying if they're being assessed at your access site and then accepted into your program a day later and you're doing another intake, that's gonna be re-traumatizing them. That's exactly what coordinated entry is trying to avoid, is you've already got their assessment, work with that. Because having people tell their story over and over and over again is traumatic.
I get that, but that's not giving me that much information.
But it's a starting place. So don't not use it, is what we're saying. Don't not use it. It's not gonna, there shouldn't be anything in there that's gonna bias you against people. So it's a good jumping off place. So you can supplement as you go on, but the point of coordinated entry is it's coordinated, it's one thing.
I think I would actually recommend something different for DB providers. I hear you, and I think that when coordinated entry is at its best, that's what it does. And I think that our system is still so young that we're working through a lot of things, and so it'll be interesting to see 2 years from now what parts of the VS FDAT we're using and how that's working and all of that. I think that when a survivor comes into DB programs, they may not want us to know that they're using. They may not want us to know that they have been selling sex for drugs. They may not want us to know a lot of that information on the VS FDAT.
Which is why they can refuse to answer.
Well, but they might not because they feel like they have to get a score to get a referral. So I guess I just, for DB providers, I think looking at that really critically about what the survivor is wanting you to know is the most important piece. And I would hate for a VS FDAT to inform a survivor's trajectory without those.
Right, and in an ideal world, the DB provider would be the one administering the FDAT, not just an anonymous 211 faceless person on the phone.
Definitely.
I
think also part of what you're saying is that even when we do these things with people, people don't walk into or call our hotline and immediately trust us and tell us.
Oh, I get that, and there are sometimes we don't get it, they shouldn't have to, and sometimes people wait a few weeks before they do the VSPDATs, and that's okay. They might be in the safe house a couple of weeks or a month before they do their VSPDAT, and that's okay. You don't have to do an intake right off the bat. That's perfectly all right. We want people to feel safe before they are administered. Like Sonia and I have had these discussions a lot, that like we don't do them on the day they come in, you know, and same with Kayla. You know, often it happens over time, and that's okay. Like there's no right way for survivors to progress. It needs to be up to that person, because every person is different, and how they handle the trauma of fleeing is going to be different for every person. And the system should never be system focused. It's always got to be person focused. And if it gets to a point where it's not, we're doing it wrong.
Is there any data about how these questions were developed with respect to culture or?
Yeah, the org code developed this. They're a Canadian company, and they have a whole website dedicated to it. So just go, just Google org code, and there's a whole website all about it. So it's really, really neat the way that they undertook this.
I just want to say too, I think that it came up for us too in our agency, like how will we use the VSPDAT later in case management? So I think there's like an in-between too, right? Where we can say to someone, you know, I know you did this VSPDAT, you did this, you know, assessment tool a month ago, now you're in the program. You know, some of the things that were asked were really like sensitive and personal. Are there any things now that you want us to like put on your goals and work on that came up in the VSPDAT? Like, so
that's the perfect way to use it, actually.
Yeah, like rather than saying like, you said this, so we have to address that, right? That's the difference, I think, sometimes with DV providers. Like, we know this information, and so we might broach it in a very like caring, concerning, like, you know, you told us these things, now what can we help you with now?
Right, and that's not just DV, that should be the way it's done across the board. Yeah, absolutely. It's conversation starters, yeah. Yes.
I think that sometimes in the limited experience I've had administering them is that clients sometimes think that they don't want to answer yes to the higher scores, because like some of those questions that are like, do you have X, Y, or Z that will impact you maintaining housing? In their minds, they're thinking like, well, if I say yes to that, nobody's going to give me.
And that's across the board. That's not just a DV thing. And I always remind people, you know, this isn't a job interview. We don't want your best self. We want your true self, because we want to be able to help you get the support you need. We want to set you up to succeed. And if that means, you know, presenting your true self and not your best self, then that's what we want. So, and again, that's a conversation. Yes.
So I just, as an access center, I did want to say one of the things that we've seen since we went to this 0 to 3, unless they're the youth with the DV or veteran, they don't get placed in the queue. The relationships that we've built in our county, we have where when that person is coming into a cold weather shelter and they know that they should have scored higher than a 3, they have been having them actually get reassessed with them there. And we're finding whenever we can actually sit down as the access center, sometimes at the shelter, we are finding that they're scoring 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, and we're actually being able to actually.
And that's a good point. If you have somebody that you know has scored really low, and you know for a fact that that score is incorrect, a reassessment is possible. You do need to have a conversation with your regional manager if you're going to do a reassessment. Only regional managers can authorize a reassessment of a person. And reassessments can be done because, you know, situations have changed. Maybe they didn't understand the VSPDAT, or like you just know this person scored a 3 and there is no way on God's green earth that they should be a 3. Just have a conversation with your RMs. I've never denied a reassessment. It just needs to be documented that we have agreed to let somebody be reassessed. The exception to that is if they were assessed more than 6 months ago, and then they they can be given a new assessment, that's fine. But if you wanna reassess somebody within that 6-month window, just have a conversation with us, reach out to us via email or phone call, and just say, hey, here's this issue, and we're gonna say yes, like.
So you're saying 6 months, so like, let's say they, I don't know, let's say for some reason they're taken off the queue and it was less than 6 months and they're coming back.
Just have a quick
pull it back up,
conversation.
You don't have to like do a full one again.
It
So what you're saying,
depends, it depends, if it's somebody that, you know, they were pulled off the queue because they got housed, and if the housing didn't work out, then yeah, you don't have to get my permission to do another assessment. But if it's, they scored a 3 when they called 211, but Simone's got them, and Simone knows that they are a whole hot mess. And there's no way they should have scored a 3, and Simone's like, yeah, I know he'll talk to me where he might not talk to the person, the anonymous person on the end of 211. Just have a conversation with me and tell me that, and I'm gonna say, yeah, Simone, go reassess him. So when in doubt, have a conversation with your regional managers. We're here. Pester us, make us earn our salary. That it's literally our job to help you. We will, like I said earlier, we will get in the weeds with you. And if we don't know an answer, we'll figure it out. And if that involves, you know, pestering Maria or pestering Jason or pestering Lee Howard or Kathy Craigland, we will figure it out for you.
We're easily pestered.
We're easily pestered.
That whole group of us.
Yeah, the whole group. The whole group.
I think, so one of the things that I think is important from what you just said about the impact of an in-person assessment is really, really good learning. So those folks that Chris just mentioned, plus the regional managers and Kayla, we're all on the coordinated entry committee for the COC. And part of our task is to make sure the coordinated entry is actually working and working well for folks that are needing to come into the system. And I think that like that sort of learning from Franklin County is one that needs to be shared at that level. So maybe if we all could talk, or Erica, if you could follow up, and y'all could talk about that and report that back to the committee, I think that would be really, really great. I also think that as you all are doing the ISBIT acts and are moving people into the system, like the things like that you're finding, please let your regional manager know, or let me know if you're a DB program or whatever, whoever you feel comfortable calling or talking to, so we can give that feedback back to the committee, so we're not, so we're actually taking the learning that's working, that we're finding from you all, and moving it forward within the system.
Yes. Last thing, and then I promise I'll be quiet. If you are a DB provider who is not currently doing these FIDATs and you want to learn to do these FIDATs, we have opened up our pilot now. So if you are a DB provider who wants to do your own VSPDATs and start participating in the way transitions in DBSCP are, talk to your regional manager, and we will make that happen for you. We will come out to your location, do specific training, and make it happen. And you can talk to transitions, you can talk to DBSCP. We've been doing it with both of these guys for 2 years now, and it is working well. We have a really solid system that we're really pretty proud of. So we're ready to bring it to everybody else. Any other questions, issues, anything on the chat?
No, there's
nothing on the chat. Okay. Anybody? All right, then I'm gonna say thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I know some of you drove a fairly long distance to get here. And we will send out all of the handouts and put the slides on Workplace this afternoon.